Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Mandala. Very delighted to be with you here today, and very exalted we are. For our guest here is Humanity of Humanity and the Whalers, a guest who we've tried very hard to acquire. In fact, we had to delay last week's program due to scheduling difficulties with Mr. Humanity.
Yeah, I have an ongoing lawsuit with the estate of Bob Marley. You know, I sued them over the Whalers name, and so I had to have a court appearance, and thankfully I'm here this week. I got a big payout.
That's you know what, it's about time we took down some of the what they call, big Rasta. It's just been,
man, big Rasta is what really controls the world.
I mean,
think about it.
Yeah, you think about it. Big reggae, like how much money they make a year selling everyone those Blum papers.
They call it dub grub.
It's disgraceful, and I think more people need to speak out about it. And I wish people with a larger platform than ours would speak out about it. I mean, it's ridiculous, and I also wish that there were more fun things to do, than to pursue these sort of like injustices in the world. Fortunately, there are more fun things to do, like listening to records. And I imagine you've listened to a lot of records in your time, Mr. Humanity.
I've listened to 5. Only 5. The 5 I'm going to talk about today.
But those 5 were very formative on you. Like they've inspired your entire musical oeuvre, have they not?
Definitely. I've listened to these 5 albums maybe about as much as everyone else listens to other music.
Wow. That's impressive. So as much as all those Kiss fans when they just listen to the same records over and over again?
Yeah, essentially.
Wow. Yeah, all the Rush fans who only listen to Rush. The ELO
You reckon
fans.
that's true? It's got to be.
I've heard that, like, I've heard people, at least I remember I was seeing a Tranquility anecdote, like I went to Rush gigs and they would say they met people who would only listen to Rush.
Wow.
Which is interesting. I really love Rush, actually, but I don't think I would only listen to Rush.
They're a good band, but they're not the only band.
They're an interesting band who I think had interesting work throughout the decades, which is more than we can say for most groups, and unfortunately some of the prog groups, frankly.
Yeah.
Rush remained one of the more consistent ones, but anyway.
Yeah, they do new things, whereas the others run the course.
Yes can be disappointing here and there. For example.
Yeah.
And
yes.
And let's not speak of the likes of Genesis, for instance. Jethro Tull were okay as well, and Crimson, like we were. But anyway, this isn't a superior version of In the Prog Seat, although it absolutely could be, but that's not difficult. In fact, I would imagine a stomach bug is superior to In the Prog Seat. I had a stomach bug recently. I was quite ill, and I did find it superior to In the Prog Seat, frankly. But we're going to be talking about, initially, I like to defer to my guest this week and have him begin talking about the legendary. It's a shame we have not discussed this individual on the program yet. Ladies and gentlemen.
It's only been 4 weeks. It was bound to happen.
Yeah. May humanity educate us all on the brilliance of one Mr. Tom Bombadil, Martin Newell.
That's true. He does look a bit like Tom Bombadil, eh?
Yeah.
He embodies Tom Bombadil too.
Yeah, if he puts on the one ring, he doesn't go invisible.
Yeah, that's true. He's the one man who can wield the ring in our world. The one ring of near perfect songwriting. Or should I say, like, let's just throw shit at the wall and see what sticks songwriting, which I got to appreciate. This one is The Cleaners from Venus. Peculiar band name, but he's a peculiar man, this Martin Newell, Tom Bombadil. This album's called Number 13. I believe it's 1990.
Yeah, is this the 13th record the Cleaners put out? Is that why it's called that?
Oh, I'm not too certain. Perhaps. I mean, I don't even know if this one was a record initially. I think this might have been like all these other albums, a cassette tape.
Oh, well, yeah, excuse me.
This could be the first actual like record that he did. I'm not too certain.
According to this, it was initially released as a cassette. No indication of a LP or CD release.
So yeah, because it definitely does have the cassette lo-fi sort of sound to it. No CD release, I suppose. But this one, I have a weird, sort of interesting introduction to this artist was through the opening track on this album. It was just like a sort of suggested video quite a few years ago, and I was probably listening to like, I don't know, what are they called, like a Positive Noise or like The Sound, one of those sort of bands, and it got recommended. I just see this little like Watership Down looking rabbit, and a song called The Jangling Man, and I'm like, wow, okay, this is better be good. I click on it, and throughout the first listen to that song, I was amazed. I was like, this is the quintessential jangle pop song. It's even got the title for it, Yeah. And I just remember the second the outro starts playing like a melodic solo, I was just like, yeah, this is the quintessential jangle pop song.
Wow.
Through and through. And so, what a way to start this album, right? Great track. It's just such a potent example of this guy's style of songwriting, where it's so emotive yet sort of strangely like informative at the same time. Like it's essentially a history lesson about the 1381 peasant revolt in England, where it was almost considered sort of the first communist revolution, or like proto sort of thing, where peasants wanted to overthrow the English monarchy, but unfortunately due to sort of swift maneuvers of the royal families, what would you call them, like militants or contracted army or whatever, they're able to suppress the revolt and convince the leader, Wat Tyler, who the song's kind of about, to come meet with, I think it was King Richard II and the Child King, I think, and they beheaded him on the field as he was trying to negotiate a settlement to end the revolt. And so it's just it's like clearly this historical event was on his mind, and he somehow sort of empathized with it within the realm of 1980s sort of like Thatcherite Britain or whatever. And so the song has such an evocative way of sort of drawing out a history lesson with these sort of emotive tendencies, and like all done within the structure of this sort of like working class gardener's perspective. And the jangling man, essentially. He's been in the cold too long. And, like I said, what a way to open an album. And then, from then on, the album just sort of doesn't quit. It's got a great second track, which, you seem to like a lot.
I adore
it's, a weird little, like, organ number. And then it's got a couple of raga songs on there, with these amazing, incredibly lo-fi guitar work. And then, there's like a weird sort of like waltzy jazz song, and just the variety on this album is kind of ridiculous, especially from a DIY, a cassette, a home recording job. And it's just the sort of album where if you're a fan of creative songwriting, jangle pop, post-punk, DIY music, like it just ticks so many boxes. I think it's very broad in its capacity for appreciation, and naturally he sort of had a sort of revival in the 2000s and 2010s that really put him over the top in the sort of the internet age of putting this music that was only initially released as cassette into sort of the digital ether, and made him bigger than he ever was in a way, and internationally, not just within the realm of like Southern England or whatever. So and of course, like, it's the sort of thing that the internet was made for, was to spread stuff like this, because this would have never reached anywhere outside of those local scenes, Northumbria or wherever he's from, Mm-hmm. He infamously wouldn't, because he's a gardener and sort of a kind of eccentric, like working class, like greeny kind of guy, and he didn't like car travel and things like that. Like Tom Bombadil or, J.R.R. Tolkien, despised this sort of industrial civilization that we'd sort of, pretended was the greatest thing ever in the 20th century. And so he'd, like, ride bikes between towns on tours and stuff like that. He did that infamously with another group he did called the Brotherhood of Lizards. So I find it really fascinating that this sort of, eccentric guy was able to find an audience, a global audience of all things, through the, made him more relevant 30 years after this was released than it was at the time. And that's why I really do like the internet, and as far as spreading music, it puts things like this into your, within your sort of view, and I'm just glad that I came across it, It was one of those things where it was like uncanny, sort of like how I've my experience with, say, the book Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse, where I found it on the street, I start reading it, and it's about a guy who finds a paper called The Treatise on the Steppenwolf on the street, and it's talking to him in a strange way, in a very literal way. And this is how I feel about this album. Like, it just came along and found me at the right time, and just, just resonated in such a fruitful way, and continues to this day. Like, because of this album, I went back and listened to all his other stuff. Not all of it, because there's heaps, but at least like 50% of his, 60% of his material, and definitely like all the 80s stuff and the Andy Partridge album, and it's all like high quality stuff. Like I said, his style of songwriting is sort of just throw shit at the wall and see what sticks. But I sort of, and he's good at manicuring and trimming like a gardener within these songs. So I kind of find it a noble venture. It's even if not every song's as good as The Jangling Man or No Go or A Man of Our Time, all these great songs. It's still worth listening to, and generally they're in the sort of realm of post-punk, as in like after-punk songwriting, where a song doesn't have to be longer than 2 to 3.5 minutes.
Yeah.
Perfect, It doesn't overstay its welcome. So even if a song's not the greatest thing you've ever heard by Martin Newell, it'll then segue into the greatest thing you've ever heard, So it's always worthwhile listening to his stuff. And he's just he's literally a magical artist, I feel. And so, I guess I can't stop talking up this album, so I'll pass it over to you.
I'd never listened to. I'd heard the first 2 tracks before. You've played them, Jangling Man and No Go. No Go I grew enormous fondness for. That organ sound, that pitch.
It's great,
what
yeah,
a
yeah.
Sound. I mean, it's not a sound anyone in a hi-fi setting is exploring in the 1980s. Although it is like it shows how far things have come. Like, this is a nicer organ sound than a lot of professional recordings of the 60s. Just goes to show how far music technology and recording technology had changed. Martin Newell makes it seem easy, doesn't he? Putting these songs together. My goodness. The first Martin Newell song I became overly familiar with was, you were also playing Mr. Humanity. We're only listening to 5 albums ever, but you were listening to the song The Greatest Living Englishman, which is a song that's, I have to admit, as a sort of, as a bizarre Catholic Anglophile, I found myself really appreciating that song. It's the kind of thing I wanted to hear from, like, say, and I imagine he may have wanted to compose, Tony Banks' solo career. I hear some of the songs from around the early 80s Genesis, like That's All from the self-titled, or the tracks from The Fugitive, his 1983 album, which is a really good album, actually.
Yeah, I agree,
A bit underrated, perhaps. And I feel like The Greatest Living, it's everything, it makes you think of like a better version of the Genesis song, Trick of the Tail.
Sure.
Which I think you've compared before to, it's like Paul McCartney in that kind of "Your Mother Should Know" sense.
Yeah, the piano chords are very similar.
Yeah, but so there's this interesting thing where that English timelessness of the troubadour tradition seeping its way into that British music hall / psych pop thing of the 60s, Paul McCartney and the Beatles, and then it finds its way to that sort of more traditional, anti-industrial, anti-Thatcher jangle pop of the 80s with folks like the Smiths, of Johnny and Morrissey, and then Martin Newell almost like the perfect, like this Englishman who's occupying every century of the island's history.
In a way, it goes back to 1381 even,
Yeah, he's a very interesting fellow. This is a really fantastic album. I mean, right from this Beatrice Potter-esque illustration you can see in front of you viewers.
Yeah.
I mean, doesn't it make you want to listen to that? It's a really, really strong album. The third track, Marriott, was terrific.
The piano on that's great as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly consistent. I mean, even just Jangling Man and No Go, that's one of the biggest 1-2 punches of all time. I mean, people talk about, and we may talk about it in future, Queen News of the World, We Will Rock You, Re the Champions. Yeah, that's the most iconic thing in the world. It's lasted till this day, and it probably will for decades. But I think Jangling Man and No Go ought to be just as important, because they're so likeable, infectious, re-listenable.
It's a great way to start an album, yeah.
He knew what was up, and I have nothing but praise for this particular release. I'd also like to recommend, although I'm positive we talked about this in a previous Mandala, the Jangling Man documentary from, I think, 2020. If you can track that down, it's an extraordinary... This was before I became familiar with some of these songs I was mentioning before, and it's an extraordinary look into Newell's history, his philosophy, his ethos, his humanity, his soul, and his songwriting process. He plays a few songs in there that I thought, oh my god, this man, like, this is like Cole Porter, like Ray Charles, like this is unbelievable.
That very
this man is
sophisticated classical.
As I said, he makes it seem so easy, and you go, oh, I'm going to write a song, and I'm going to find myself just okay, I'll change the words to one of his songs and see if I can go from there.
That's how everyone starts there.
And no, I mean he's such a fascinating character, and you know, within this zeitgeist right now, everyone's getting a documentary made about them, some sort of lo-fi thing. And
sure.
Some individuals, it's fine. Like I love it. You know, there's been documentaries on Mike Mignola's Hellboy, Chris Claremont's X-Men. I'm happy about that. Neil Gaiman, all these things that are kind of cool and interesting. Every other B movie filmmaker's getting a film.
Yeah, everyone.
William Graff. There's like 4 Roger Corman documentaries. Frank Zappa.
It's because his personality just permeates throughout the whole documentary.
Yes.
That's why he's the star of the show, essentially.
Yeah, no, it is a very, very good watch. Very grateful to have seen it, and we're endorsing Martin Newell here today, one of the more likable and just flat out impressive songwriters I've heard.
And I should say, just go to the Cleaners from Venus. He's got a YouTube channel where he's just like got 100 views on each video of him just explaining how to construct and write a song and things like that, and his processes, and like how often does an artist completely remove the veil of their creative process and share with their fan base how they do everything, you know? It's perfect.
We
That's
also
what you
consider
want.
this as important as the 1955 Henry Georges Clouzot documentary, The Mystery of Picasso, wherein him and Pablo Picasso collaborated to watch Pablo paint in real time. There was a camera attached to the other side of his canvas which demonstrated what Pablo was painting in real time.
Yeah,
interesting. Great works of art.
I got to check that out.
No, that ought to be viewed in every high school art class. It's unbelievably brilliant. I guess it's not the most accessible documentary until the internet age to find.
Sure.
Maybe in France you could have
just
seen
like Martin Newell.
Yeah, but yeah, no, that's. I mean, Clouzot was a great genius, and that was his great contribution to documentary film. Aside from the horror thrillers such as Le Diabolique or Wages of Fear, which had been released in 2 years before that in '53.
Okay.
Anyway, this isn't FOTD. This is Mandala.
Yeah.
So do we have
It
anything
fits
else?
definitely. Yeah.
I like my little cross-textual analysis as a little K-punk devotee. It's fun.
No, especially when it applies like that, like something like an artist, removing the veneer of how their creative process. Mm-hmm. It's an important thing, I think.
And unless we've got anything else to share about Martin Newell, should we get into more synthesizer territory?
Just definitely listen to it, yeah.
Okay, so last week on Mandala, I was championing the post-John Fox Ultravox, which is not something I'd historically done since getting into John Fox, because we had Systems of Romance, that was very good, but you know, getting into Metamatic and then kind of thinking about the Ultravox material with Midger, Vienna onwards, it's like, wow, it seems like a lot of creativity was kind of pumped out of this outfit. I mean, I'm still not a fan of the Vienna LP, frankly. I mean, it just seems a bit too, I said this last time, adult contemporary for me, if nothing else. And Rage and Eden sounded a lot better. You could go to last week's episode if you'd like to be reminded.
It's a lot dancier, yeah.
Yeah, really good stuff. But, you know, it wasn't as successful as Vienna. And so for the next album, Quartet, which is still a fairly likeable album in my opinion, doesn't seem as experimental or ambitious, but it's still got Connie's production. It's fairly nice. They've still got the songwriting creativity and the creativity of kind of vaguely krautrocky, but not too out there. Not, you know, rock in opposition, like experimental, like, you know, these arrangements, which are they're not Universe Zero or something like that, or Art Bears or whoever. So, you know, you still got, I mean, it's still an interesting album, Quartet. And then, you know, Quartet was probably, I assume, I could be wrong, I don't think that was as successful as Rage and Eden was. And so, for Lament, I feel like they're getting a bit more creative again, because this sounds like a more denser, interesting album than certainly Quartet. The more I listen to it, but maybe even than Rage and Eden, and maybe even I like this more than Systems of Romance. I'm trying to figure out why this is. Why do I keep coming back to Lament? And I realize it's like, this is really kind of gothic and cold, and yet it's still trying to be a very popular commercial album. And I thought, wow, gothic synth pop. I guess this is the era of The Cure, and I guess this feels like a viable creative / commercial sonic territory to explore. I love the production on this album. This is my favorite of the Connie productions for Ultravox, and I'm at the point where I think this is my favorite of the Ultravox albums, because I don't think the songwriting is super gripping, but I think how the synth sounds elevate the tracks is extraordinary.
And how it's mixed with headphones on.
Oh, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, I haven't listened to this one so much with headphones.
Yeah, it's mixed so creatively. It's so elegantly. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, I will do that then, because to learn more of the mysteries of Lament. This is extraordinary. I mean, it's like synth pop's answer to the music of Sad Lovers and Giants around this time, or synth pop's answer to Wind and Wuthering by Genesis, if you will. Like, it's just such great mood music, and that the last two tracks are very much like some of the best stuff on Rage in Eden. They're vaguely experimental, but they're hooky, and they're the kind of tracks where I don't know if you could release them as singles, but if they're tracks on an album that you play for someone, they're not going to think that the tracks are too obtuse or inaccessible. You know, you grip them in there. Like, I think tracks on an LP with more hit singles on them can be useful to getting people to listen to stuff which they might not otherwise.
Precisely, yeah.
Which the radio would never bother to, radio needs to make money, I guess, and they need people listening, so they don't want to take risks on stuff, which is their prerogative, it's for good or bad. All the same, I'm really glad that Ultravox took the creative risk, if it was indeed a risk, to record something like Lament, because I think it's considered that, and I have sampled it a little bit, at least the album afterward. Ultravox kind of went into a bit of an artistic nosedive afterward. I believe, I'm almost certain, I could be wrong, this is the last one that Connie Plank would produce for them, and none of the albums afterward are considered very good. And having listened to the next one, which sounds a bit more streamlined, less synth pop, when this electronic production kind of became just sort of embedded in the mainstream and kind of milquetoast by the late 80s.
Yeah,
that's kind of what we get on Ultravox 86. I think it's called Uvox even, unfortunately. And it's interesting because I always kind of thought maybe Ultravox are a bit more of one of these bigger groups that weren't as interesting as some of the more serious synth pop groups. Like we consider OMD like, they were the real geniuses, or even some of these minimal synth acts, or New Order, of course. But then it's like, Depeche Mode, they're not as good as some of the other ones, which I stand by, to be honest. They're fun and listenable, but they're not geniuses, and no one actually thinks that, surely. I never thought the Human League were that brilliant. They were very early to the game in 79, but so was Gary Newman, and his career after Pleasure Principle ain't that interesting, sadly. We were talking about that in an early Mantle too.
Similar to
as brilliant as Pleasure Principle is.
Early Depeche Mode, I think I heard a bit of like the second or third album, and that's like this, or like you were saying, that's like a gothic synth pop album as well.
Yeah, early on they're pretty good.
Yeah, before the hits and stuff.
Yeah, like by the time you get to Black Celebration, music for the masses, it's a bit, dare I say, kind of boring.
Yeah.
Kind of too vocal. That dumb baritone he has. And then there's another group and I kind of lumped Ultravox into that because of Vienna and because I wasn't familiar with the John Fox era. And of course, Systems of Romance, oh wow, look at that. Great stuff. But the band Ultravox, they were a very serious synthesizer outfit. They were taken very seriously. They have music which some British critics and even some American electronic... I've read this is probably just on Wikipedia, but one of these electronic artists said something like, they said techno was invented in Chicago in 1980-something, but I remember listening to these Ultravox records in the early 80s, and they sounded like what people called techno later. And this is what... I don't remember who said... Someone like a 2000s act. They weren't... I think it was like Simon Reynolds interviewing them or something.
Okay, interesting.
But I thought that was a really interesting statement because when you do think about it, Ultravox were very early to the game on a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
And they took this genre very seriously, I think.
Ultravox have more of a disco beat though, whereas techno has that like a beat on the first and the third.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, rather than like a 4/4 beat.
Yeah. But in any instance, Lament is very re-listenable. I'm probably going to keep listening to it for at least a little while after this has been recorded and uploaded. This is the most interesting of the Ultravox albums to me, and I'm very surprised because I'm not even sure if I would say Rage in Eden is the superior to Systems of Romance, but I feel rather comfortable saying that about Lament. It's fucking fascinating, and I keep going back to maybe just it's more production than songwriting, although the songs certainly aren't poorly constructed. They're not hooky or anything like that. I just think sometimes it's like they're going back to the chorus, saying the title of the song a few times. I'm like, all right, like that's nice. I mean, I like the production enough that it doesn't really bother me all that much. Although it does have me thinking like, like to be honest, it's not like. But this is a Martin Newell, just a point of reference.
The production definitely does shine over the songwriting, but that doesn't take away from the quality of the album at all, though.
No.
It's more of a production piece. than a songwriting album anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. So I take it you enjoyed this one.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I thought Raging Eden was quite good, but this one stood out more definitely. Yeah, a lot of it was due to its sound. It has such a I don't know how to describe it. It's got such a like a clean yet gothic sound to it.
Well, can I just say
please.
It's very precise but dense.
Yes, and you know why I think why? I wanted to look up. I tried to find it on the Wikipedia, but I couldn't. The equipment they used for it. It's probably on the Discog, so I'll have to look that up later.
Right.
But it sounds like they used a Fairlight. Mm-hmm. It sounds like it's, amongst other things. But yeah, it's got that density and clean sort of Fairlight sound to it. And you know what it reminded me quite a lot of? An album that, it has grown on me a bit, but this is another synth-pop album from 1984. Do you reckon you could guess?
I imagine there's a number of them, so I guess I could.
Junk Culture by OMD, which is their Fairlight album.
Okay.
And their more dense, sort of poppier album. But this blew that album out of the water in my mind. Like, especially production-wise. Maybe a few of the tracks on Junk Culture have that more quirky OMD songwriting style. But, this album doesn't have any of the cheese that the production. You know how sometimes Fairlight production can be quite cheesy?
Yeah.
Fairlight production is interesting. It can either be the most, elegant Kate Bush-esque, Peter Gabriel sort of thing, or it can be Cheese City. So it's interesting how that works. And this album just, like I said earlier, it was mixed so well, a great headphone listen, and just so dense and expansive with its synth arrangements, It's it was definitely a great listen. And one thing that one thing that was a bit more jarring about Raging Eden is Midge's voice doesn't quite suit the aesthetic of the music, in my mind at least.
Yeah.
Whereas in this album, it was layered in and mixed into the sound in a much more natural and fitting way.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting. It was funny as well, the second last song, he sung in such a strange way. You know what, it reminded me, speaking of Rush from earlier, of like Geddy Lee. I was like, wow, this is like a synth era Rush song in a way. So like you were saying earlier with the you have songs like Dancing with Tears in My Eyes, which was like a hit or whatever, and then I think there were a couple of other hits that enabled people to listen to more out there music, like the second last track on this album. A sort of quasi Rush song in a way,
Yeah, I tend to think that the latter part, I like the first part of the album, but the latter part of the album, I feel this way about Raging Eden as well. That's where the real strong, kind of more experimental tracks are, because if you're playing it, you're not going to turn it off now, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And they top-loaded all the singles at the start,
Yeah. Really impressed with Lament. Very happy to have another synth pop classic from the 80s in general, certainly from Ultravox. This was a great band, as removed from John Fox. I think Midge's fairly competent. I don't know if he's really writing these songs. I assume the band has a lot to do with it, because you do.
Yeah, I'm not too sure.
You'd find detect some continuity with the earlier Ultravox.
Yeah.
And with the John Fox element taken out, obviously, there's. It's kind of a moodscape album, and rather than something which is kind of dancey and hooky, like I said, it's more gothic and cold, I feel. But in any instance, we have, I think, one of the more captivating and creative of the very mainstream synth pop albums of the 1980s. I endorse Ultravox's Lament. I think this is the best of the LPs that they released. I mean, I'm not listening to it as an LP, mind you. The only one I have listened to as an LP is actually Systems of Romance.
Yeah.
But that sounds fantastic. And I'm automatically listening to an LP. That's sensational. And I believe now, do we have anything else to share about Ultravox's Lament?
No, not a lot. One thing I did mention to a guy who I work with today, he once told me that it was strange. His wife was like a photographer for some of these bands in England back in the day. He's an English guy. And he mentioned once that his wife is good friends still to this day with Midger.
Wow.
And so I mentioned I was listening to this album today, and he was a bit chuffed. He was like, "Wow, younger people are still interested in this sort of music." And then I was talking about like OMD and Echo and the Bunnymen because he said he was from Liverpool.
Yeah.
And yeah, he was just sort of taken a bit aback by how this sort of music has stayed relevant in a way.
Yeah, he'd be maybe surprised how like a lot of people our age and younger have like gravitated to this sort of music. I mean, he haven't, but like so many have because of it's just so easy to access on the internet, and a lot of people prefer the priorities of those older songs. Those older songs are a lot of the first songs we ever hear because of our parents, and so it's natural that a lot of us find that sort of music very appealing. A lot of people really like, what's formative and sort of impressionable, less surroundings of the contemporary. So they might like contemporary music too, but there's also a link to the old world which they appreciate, something which is kind of timeless and pre-established. And I think that's where some of those bands come in. And as the 2000s and 2010s proved, that 80s music was very influential on a lot of at least subgenres of mainstream popular music anyway.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that acts from the 80s would be explored again to this day, in particular, I feel.
Yeah, speaking of gothic synth pop music, I guess we haven't covered like a sort of what you'd call a cold wave artist yet, have we? And in a way,
maybe not.
Yeah, that's kind of like the ultimate genre of gothic synth pop in a way. And this album is definitely almost a kind of progenitor of this sort of stuff in a way, because it's, what year is it, 84? Yeah, it's pretty early to that game, and same year as Lament, I guess. This is Just Because by Martin Dupont. Man, this is a weird artist. Can't even remember how I first came across this artist. Probably by a similar circumstance to The Cleanest from Venus. Probably around a similar time as well. And this is just a sort of an artist and an album, probably more than... I think they had 3 other albums from the 80s.
Yeah.
And this is the one that sort of I've always kept coming back to. I just feel that all their music's really good, but there's just something about this album that really, really puts... and this is their first album as well, that really captures a sort of... like you can see where they got the name Cold Wave, because there's just something sort of isolating yet like dungeon-esque about this sort of music, It's all recorded with these really stark sort of spacey hard synths, and then strange like mixtures of wonky like male baritone and like wailing female vocals. It's just got excuse me. If you're a fan of like the sort of weirder elements of 80s post-punk music, this album will be like right up your alley, just because it creates such a stark atmosphere. And it's just got such a... For one thing that I find really interesting about it is its like creative use of drum programming. Like its use of 808s and stuff is so far ahead of the game, really. It's just... it's got more of that funk techno beat, and then it's got like weird like... just like 16th hi-hat beats, and it's such a fun experimentation in pop music, this album. And I could listen to it. It's like it could definitely be a desert island disc for me. It's that interesting, I find. It's just constantly pounding away with abstract synth ideas. That's probably the best way I could describe this album. It's abstract, especially for pop music. You rarely get pop music that's this abstract. And even for like a minimal cold wave album, Hi-Fi, it sounds really good.
It does,
yeah. I mean, I would recommend this to anybody who is a fan of this sort of lost 80s synth pop music, because even though they're not quite a lost band, they're not that well known. Well, it's similar to that Aksak Mabul album that you were playing. which is very in a similar vein.
Yeah, that was recorded at the time, but wasn't released until 2010.
Yeah, exactly. It's a sort of music that was very underground at the time. Like, it was too poppy for punks and too punk for pop people.
Well, and worth mentioning, and maybe this is why you brought that one up. Martin Dupont are French. They didn't have much of a presence in the English speaking.
Yeah, that's true.
Mandala from Belgium.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, the Cold Wave is very French and European.
Yeah.
Definitely. So yeah, no, that's true. They didn't have that same sort of.
Maybe they were big in France. I'm not
sure. I'd love to actually know if there's any French or European people out there. Could you let us know how prevalent these bands were within their local culture?
Yeah,
and local
groups
scenes.
like Malloy and some of these other what's it, Trisomy 21?
Yeah, they're great.
One of their songs is one of the there's a song on that album which bowls me, it brings a tear to my eye.
Yeah, certainly. They're a great band.
That album's great.
Yeah, they it's such a cool style of music. It's a shame it didn't seem to get embraced in the English speaking world until the 2010s or whatever, or the 2000s. When it was rediscovered. I guess just because they couldn't promote and market it on Top of the Pops and Old Grey Whistle Test and stuff,
Look, there are logistics to getting records in shops overseas,
Yeah, of course. And you wish the audience over there were just that bit more off kilter,
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's also something.
Though to be fair, the John Peel show did play bands like Malaria from Germany and stuff like that. So some of them would kind of just break in.
Yeah.
But then they would sort of be the laughing stock of those people, It's kind of saddening in a way,
Well, you could know about these groups and maybe you could go to a certain record shop and they would get it imported for you, but you had to know about it in the first place.
You had to hear it on John Peel and be like, oh, can you get Malaria for me?
And then look it up in a book and be like, yeah, I guess we can.
Yeah.
Or they'd get back to you about it, you'd give them your phone number. It's just one of those things where it wasn't impossible, but it certainly was not easy by any stretch.
I suppose this is just another example as to how I'm a stand for digital archaeology in music, It's just so much more tactile and at your fingertips. And almost more sort of mysterious and conducive to a journey than, I don't know, going through your local record store and having them order it through a distributor seems a bit kind of unromantic in a way, Whereas sort of coming across these things through Steppenwolf-esque, sort of ethereal interventions, divine interventions in a way, is kind of very romantic. I find it interesting and exciting like that.
I think the thing is, I think everyone saw, but if you came across it on John Peel or however you came across this stuff pre-internet was inherently Steppenwolf, if you know what I mean, because
it was that as well. That's true, sure.
I'm not saying it's not that now, but I think some people find it less romantic now. I don't necessarily feel this way as such. I mean, I have a more nuanced opinion on it, which I don't need to get into here. I'm sure I have on FOTD too many times, but
sure.
There is something to be said for when it's all there. It's there's less sense of adventure in the unknown in a respect. I suspect that's a bit superficial, and we need to kind of.
I find the opposite. I was just saying,
it's a lot to take in. It's a lot to take in for a human being.
Yeah. So the goal is
a lot of choice is intimidating, and so it's just it's just one of these things we need to wrap our head around.
Yeah,
like a lot of things in the internet age, like a great many things.
Well, the goal is that you shouldn't feel you have to need to take it all in because like you said, you're not going to take it all in. So then the things that you do take in almost find you in a way. That's sort of how I see it. Whereas, I was saying before, I don't know, you hear it on John Peel, but then you can't go back and listen to it again unless you go to this store and have to go through the sort of laborious process of this logistics of getting it to you.
Yeah.
That's why I feel it's less romantic because it can come your way. And then you can have access to it forever now, that's amazing in my mind at least.
Yeah, and also a lot.
So that's how I would differ with that.
And also a lot of people have hang-ups about a lack of physical media, which I'm totally on the side of. I'm not anti-physical media, but I'm very.
No, records they do sound good.
I have a problem with I mean, certainly in regards to films, like I'm really in a place of like physical media is definitely unnecessary in regard to films. And even with music, like after a while, like I feel like sometimes owning physical media kind of like people overrate things that they own sometimes simply because they say, oh look, this is a good album of its genre, and it's like, yeah, but if you could listen to anything in your like internet library, you know, in YouTube, Spotify, SoulSeek, whatever you're using, are you going to play that? If not, why not? And people will say, on the other hand, like, oh, but then you're underrating things because they're on the internet. And like, listen, like, songs don't just get fucking points for existing. I'm sorry. Like, and these things aren't even songs. Like, a rock group doing like a verse chorus, like, look, after a while, it's like, what's a song? A song's something you sing. A song's something people sat around and sang back in the day, right? Before you could record any of this stuff. These aren't songs. Like, these aren't things people would sing if they were. People wouldn't have written these songs if you had to put some extra space on a fucking disc. Don't call a track with words a song.
Yeah,
that's like just legally it's a song.
Like I'm thinking,
I get that legally it's a song.
Sounds like what you're describing is like a Kiss, is like a Kiss song where the words are just arbitrary.
I mean, look, Parasite's a decent song, so like whatever, like.
Everyone has one good song at least. Though.
Yeah, that was one of the Ace Frehley ones as well.
Okay.
That song Hotter Than Hell before they were really big.
Yeah, right.
Hotter Than Hell is a really bad production, which is fucking awesome actually. Which makes it, I think, the best one. To be fair to the hardcore fans of that band, they're like, the hardcore ones are like, nah, yeah, Hotter Than Hell, that's the one.
Sure.
Like the second one.
Man, I really can't stand Kiss, but for some reason... I don't like them that
much.
I do
find... The Spinal Tap-esque mythology is really fascinating.
And I find Black Diamond to be a kind of good song. I kind of like that song.
Because you heard the Replacements one, so it got you in.
Maybe it's just because of the Replacements cover, but... I can listen to the Kiss version of that and be like, nah, this is... Yeah, fuck yeah.
There's Peter Criss singing that, actually. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I can get behind that song. I don't know why. I don't know. It's the only time that they're not just completely banal in my mind.
Well, because
I gotta hear Parasite, I guess, as well.
Yeah, like that's just like it's just a weird like that. You know, they're trying to be like Alice Cooper or the New York Dolls. Like they're literally a New York band as well.
Yeah,
so, like,
yeah.
I don't know. Sorry, I don't know Alice Cooper. They were from Detroit. Sorry.
Okay.
But shock rock, you know. Like,
yeah.
That was what the visual. That's what they were going for. Obviously, the Dolls at New York.
Yeah.
I ought to give my thoughts on this particular Martin Dupont album.
Yeah, please.
It's fantastic. Really, 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 really good. You know, like I don't spend much time listening to Martin Dupont relative to some other groups, but when I do, I think they're really, really good. Just Because is great. Hot Paradox is great.
Yeah.
Apparently they've got a 2023 album, which some people seem to quite like.
Oh. What's that one called?
It's called Kintsugi.
Oh, I gotta hear that because I like that album from like 2020. That was good.
Oh, is that a 2020 album?
But I think it was old recordings. It was like 2019.
Oh, it's called Accident of Stars?
Yeah.
It's only the compilations on this website.
Yeah. That's a great album.
Oh, but you're saying that's old recordings?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. I mean, all the same. If it's new.
Unreleased stuff. Yeah.
That's great, you know.
Yeah, they got quite a few good albums, definitely.
Yeah, the thing with this group and this album is it's very polished, very pretty, very stark, and it's very gripping and engaging, fascinating. You know, it's like that telex maximalism. We speak bad enough about Martin Dupont of French, but you know, Belgium, France. Sorry, Belgians and French. Sorry. But for everyone else in the world, you're not that different to us. Anyway, I'm making fun.
Except for the Luxembourgians.
Oh, they truly run the world.
Yeah.
Think about it, guys.
Think about it. They're sandwiched between France and Belgium.
And Monaco, we need to have a conversation about all the gambling in Monaco.
Yeah. Watch out.
Casino Royale.
The Grand Prix.
What's going on? I don't think it's Montenegro Casino Royale.
I can't recall, to be honest.
Okay, well, excuse me. Excuse us. But no, it's an incredibly impressive outfit, and it's amazing that they really cared about this stuff. It's not trying to be non-commercial, although there is a certain sense in which they're not pandering to anyone's specific interests in the mainstream. I feel it's incredibly infectious. I think it's ripe for rediscovery. Very European, very unpredictable. I think it's a really fascinating group to get involved with. and I definitely want to spend more time with them. And it's interesting, the cold wave term gets thrown around a lot more now retroactively, in which case as like a subgenre of post-punk period. Well, which is to say, you know how people say symphonic prog is like Yes, Genesis, ELP, and then you wouldn't necessarily throw King Crimson, Tull, and Rush into symphonic prog.
No.
You know? People call like Joy Division, The Sound, maybe Susie, and say the Chameleons into cold wave, but you wouldn't necessarily put Swell Maps or The Fall or Magazine maybe,
or like the Mutant Disco stuff,
all of avant-garde stuff, like you know, Pop Group or This Heat, or Men from Cheltenham. If you want to get real fucking avant-garde, we'll talk about that.
That's more avant-garde, and things like
that's
Pop
rock
Group
opposition
and
almost.
Swell Maps are very influenced by like the sort of ska and reggae music, definitely, and dub. You know,
yeah, they are. Hey.
So there's the dub end of post-punk as well.
Yeah.
There's quite a few ends of post-punk,
Yeah, and so the one that's most well known, that Joy Division Gothic sound, The Cure, early U2, that's cold wave.
It's more cold wave.
That's what they call cold wave.
In retrospect,
I mean, you can argue whether it's worth calling it that, because cold wave did specifically refer to a continental European genre. Groups like Martin Dupont in France, Trisomé 21 and Norma Loy.
Well, that's that Polish band.
Ciara.
Yeah,
the first album I listened to, which was, I remember being referred to as cold wave. I think it's on that old Moo post-punk chart, which is fairly well known. Ciara, Noah Alexandria, it's a masterpiece. It's so fucking good. What one of the best applications of synth lines in any popular music recordings. Not that was that popular. Ciara were before that or after that became like a hardcore punk band. It's quite interesting.
Nice.
And the stuff I've heard is it's fairly good for if you. I don't listen to that genre that much, or at least when I do, I listen to Feed Time or something.
Sure.
Support Australian culture where it is worth supporting sometimes. But in any case. Martin Dupont, big endorsement from we. Cold wave is one of the most fascinating. I mean, I don't think there's a genre that describes the music better than the term cold wave.
New wave, but it's cold.
Well, actually, there's another music genre that comes to mind, subgenre, of course. Of sorts.
Yeah.
Do we have anything else to share about Martin Dupont so I can go into that?
No, just take a look. The 4th track, awesome song. So take a look.
That thing known as free jazz.
Oh yeah, nice.
You might call it, as this website does, spiritual jazz.
Yeah,
jazz funk, jazz fusion, jazz poetry.
No, this album is every type of jazz. Like when it started out, I was like, oh, this is going to be a spiritual jazz album. Then it goes into jazz funk, and then so please go on.
I actually, despite the density of this album, it's about, I think it's like an hour and 20 minutes. No, it's 75 minutes. 75 minutes, excuse me. I was going to say hour 20, but it's only an hour 15. Idris Ackamore and the Pyramids, 2020 release, Shaman. This might be the kind of thing you'd expect a 70s act to put out. Obviously, you hear this, it's a modern hi-fi production. Sounds great. It's not like one of these contemporary, cold, boring jazz releases where it sounds like you're just in the studio with them and it's like, this is all refined and kind of coffee house, isn't it?
Not at all,
This is a great sound. It sounds like you're in some cavern in the Serengeti or something. It's really, really, really nice. It evokes the artwork illustration presented here. And I think what's beautiful about this is that whilst it is the kind of it's the kind of music you would have heard depending on where you were and what circles in the 1970s, although they've learned from the genre, they've tried to maximize it, not be too indulgent, have less of that sort of, sometimes that stuff can get drony and can make some people impatient, not myself necessarily. When I listen to that music, I'm in the mood for it, so I don't get impatient with it as such. I might otherwise, to be fair, but this is it's aware that a lot of the appeal of that sort of music now is the kind of decisions made per minute of the music. All this stuff happening within the span of 2 minutes, time signatures,
how to progress
melodies, brief solos. And so Idris Ackamore and the Pyramids, it's almost like it's aware that contemporary listeners of genres such as electronic music or fast-paced metal subgenres, it's aware of that world and it's responding to it quite organically, maybe not even consciously. It's a really, really good listen. Holds up to some of the good stuff from back then. It's the best kind of. You could argue the degree to which it's doing new things or not. It's more clarifying and, dare I say, even if it's not, sober take on that genre. And I also feel as though it's got the precise musicianship without the sort of, this is an Australian reference, but aim, sort of banal pretentiousness. I once saw a YouTube video of a bunch of jazz students performing John Coltrane's My Favorite Things, and it was garbage. Yeah, they can play their instruments technically, but it's nothing. There's no feel. There's nothing.
The spirit's gone. Yeah,
they're all just trying to get good grades, and it's fucking pathetic.
It reminds me
of trying to get over heroin withdrawals. You know what I mean?
One time I was just at my older brother's house, and he took his son to a birthday party, so he set up his DJ deck and was like, play with this while I'm gone. And I'm just there, just mixing, and for the first time using a DJ deck, he like sort of gave me a quick tutorial on all the things. And like, as I'm trying, because I know nothing technically about how to use this piece of equipment, so I'm just using my intuitive knowledge of music to play around. And at one point, you can feel the music. I was like, wow, what all the jazz people were saying was true. Like, you got to feel it more than... Yeah, so I 100% agree. And this album's full of that.
And I also consider how... you modern production technology plus the precision of playing. And, like, it's people who take their playing very, very seriously and are willing to, younger people or older people still around, give it their all, great technical performances, while it's not compromising a sense of soulfulness or just character and charisma. It's not just, precision and, following the sheet. And it's worth mentioning, whilst there's almost implications I'm making that, it's good that, some younger music students, blah, blah, blah. Well, it is worth clarifying. I don't know, maybe there's different members of the group from different ages, but this album's credited to one, Idris Ackamore. Now, he's a relatively younger man. He was born in 1951, so he's turning 20 in 1971, so he's not of the old guard of jazz as such.
Sure.
He's a bit bit before his time. He was born a bit after that epoch. But, he's a relatively older man now, and he's been putting out these solo albums since 1997, and ever since 2016, he's been co-releasing these albums with a group called The Pyramids. Now, The Pyramids were formed in 1971, I believe, with Idris Ackamore. It seems to be the implication here. But they put out 3 albums in the 1970s.
Okay.
Lalabella, King of Kings, Birth Speed, Merging from 73 to 76.
Cool.
They put out another album in 2011 called Otherworldly. And ever since 2016, they've put out 4 releases of, as Idris Ackamore and The Pyramids. This is the third of 4. Shaman 2020. Absolutely superlative. I've heard the 2016 We Be All Africans. That was quite good. Okay. I don't think I've heard this 2018 one. I haven't had the chance to hear the 2023 release yet, which is called Afrofuturistic Dreams. Another really good illustration there, nice. By the way. But this is all really, really promising. And it's all of the appeal of those old free jazz, spiritual jazz, sort of Kawaida or Mwandishi recordings of back in the day, but with that sort of that retrospective look on it, like what can we do with it? What can we do to maximize the genre to engage listeners consistently at every moment? And it's more, I don't know how, like, it's fair to say, like, some of these artists, in the 70s did take the spiritual side of it very seriously. The sort of or the pan-Afro consciousness of some of these records. It was something these guys took very, and gals in the case of Alice, for example, took very, 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 very seriously. How seriously are the beliefs on this? I do not know. I haven't heard any interviews or accounts from Idris Ackamore. Birth name Bruce Baker, apparently. Himself. Although, in any case, if it's just a matter of, appreciating the music for its own sake and then doing more with it in that sort of kind of smarty, vaguely, I don't like this term, but nerdy, how like what New Wave did to rock music, how it was kind of taking the structures and then doing really clever things with it.
Sure,
we
yeah.
could do with, I think this is what we're having that moment of that more sometimes, and this is not a meant as a negative, but directionless free jazz of the 70s and late 60s. It's almost it's aware of the criticisms of the genre and kind of what people expect of the genre, but sometimes are disappointed by about it. Especially because, for example, you listen to some of the old Sun Ra's, and they're not the most high fidelity recordings on this.
No, not at all. Yeah.
So we have these contemporary. It's great that someone was willing to produce something so with such clarity, or that this technology is simply just that accessible now. I think this is a fantastic listen, and just I just wanted to. I mean, I probably talked about it longer than I expected to. I just wanted to bring it up to say that, hey, aren't we doing well that we can still get albums like this? We wouldn't get albums like this in the 2010s. And now 2020, all of a sudden, like, lockdown and, like, here we go.
Yeah.
We get records like this. I guess because everyone was just at home and they didn't have anything to do, so they just record music.
Yeah.
I don't know. For example, in 2020, you got that, there's this English pop star named Charlie XCX who put out the How I'm Feeling Now album, when she got a bunch of other people to send her stuff, fans and stuff, and it's this really great little kind of bubble pop listen, but the rest of it works.
She's
not
so
the
fancy.
greatest.
Yeah.
I wish her the best. She's
she got famous for doing a guest vocal on a fucking Iggy Azalea song.
Yeah, and
started.
I appreciate that, not trying to be disrespectful, but really, gorgeous girl like her is not like just, flaunting her parts as easy as all these other artists.
As Iggy Azalea.
Well, exactly. One of the worst things to be born in this country.
She's not
Australian.
Australian, don't say that.
Yeah, let's do something garbage like that.
Yeah, why not?
But
I'm glad you went on for quite a while about that album, because you pretty much said everything I wanted to in the description of how to describe it and what it was able to sort of evoke out of me, definitely. And as a fan of that sort of style of 70s jazz, and it mixes all the different styles, I guess the one thing I could contribute is just me personally, I don't, because I'm not a jazz musician. I don't really have too much of an interest in the theoretical and technical aspects of jazz. Mm-hmm. I prefer the sort of tactile and aesthetic appreciation of it, and how it, just listening to it,
Yeah.
And so I find it quite interesting, just the sort of, at one point you described jazz can be as self-indulgent, and I just find the sometimes the way people describe jazz, not you, but they'll use terminology like self-indulgence, and like I said, maybe they're thinking of it from a technical perspective or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't see music like that as self-indulgent. So I wonder, when people criticize this sort of out there or avant-garde stylings of jazz, I sort of just wonder why there needs to be such a heavy scrutiny on it, Why can't it just be music? It just it reminds me of this thing I read the other day on Rate Your Music for a jazz album called the artist is called Bobby Norton Units. The album's called Understanding, from 1971. Free jazz, avant-garde jazz, modern creative. Do you mind if I read this review?
Yeah, please.
It's by a guy called Breakwind from April 26, 2023. Mm-hmm. This avant-garde sounds focused, but it won't speak to you. I'll tell you, hang in there, maybe. Jazz themes are clung to, so the music isn't too far out there. Sounds like there was an attempt to keep things digestible. The boys, or it says thy boys, still get wild to provide a feeling, but it's still all rather tame considering, if you're using the Albert Ayler Chick Corea scale. Monster names, I know, but if you're going to do avant-garde, then you have to know who you're going up against.
That's a weird approach to review
or of course.
Avant-garde, yeah.
On the other hand, if avant-garde is supposed to be oblivious to competition, this is still rather tame, although focused. This album goes on much too long for as tame as it is. At some point, we must stop the self-indulgence.
Yeah, it's kind of to get alive.
And yeah, I don't understand how people are interfacing with this sort of music in that way. It's just music. Just listen to it.
What's this album called, sorry?
It's called Understanding by Bobby Norton Units. Norton spelled Naughton.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, that's the thing that I find most curious about jazz outside of being a fan of the sounds, you know, just the way it's the sort of the conversation around it seems so, maybe it's from that realm of what you were talking about before, the AIM students who are playing the notes, you know.
Yeah, I'm going to vote this one down. I've actually got an account on here, so I'm just going to vote this review down.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that was an option.
Yeah, fuck you, Breakwind.
Yeah.
AOD thinks you're a cunt, basically.
Well, if I ever was going to make an account of this website, it's just to review other people's reviews in like one sentence. Like, what are you on about? Like,
I don't think you can reply to reviews, but...
No, I just put a review there. Because on albums that only have like 1 or 2 reviews anyway.
Sure.
So it would be paired with it anyway, you know? Because
it makes sense that someone who wrote a review like that is named after flatulence, apparently.
Yeah, well, not the guy specifically. Like, I guess his review just embodied a pattern I've noticed with jazz criticism.
Well, in that case, I'm just voting down one head of the Hydra.
Yeah. The more will grow, probably, unfortunately. Hopefully that'll stop and people can just enjoy music for what it is, you know? I would call it cynical scrutiny. Because, like, does it really need to be scrutinized that much, you know? It's beyond me.
People second guess themselves too much with music.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's not like, guys, this isn't like a major business transaction you're considering that might affect the rest of your life. It's just a fucking record.
And not everything has to knock your socks off. Like, you know? And
actually, not the first time. You know how many of my favorite albums did knock my socks off the first time?
Yeah, probably most of them, right?
I don't think David Bowie's Low didn't even a little bit, but didn't knock my socks off. It was my favorite album of all time the first time.
Of course,
it was my favorite album. I used to say that was my favorite album of all time for a long time, and it's still one of them, so it's still relevant. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I do like things that punch you right in the face, but like they're not as conducive to repeat listens because there's just less reason to go back because you got the idea a few times, you know. Whereas something like Low, you can, you know, you want to keep listening because there's just you'll hear it a different way every time, you know.
Yeah. Low's
which is like jazz.
Low winds up being the most brilliant thing to listen to when you're turning 17 and everything's just fucking miserable. And I know, like, some things like, and not implying that 17 has to be miserable for anyone.
I had a friend who was 17 or 18 in 1978. 77, yeah.
Maybe they heard it in 78.
And, yeah, I think they heard it in 78 and were walking around tripping acid. Oh. And they described exactly what you just did. Yeah. That's hilarious.
Well, especially, like, I'm sure it was miserable in, like, proto-Thatcher Britain, you know, during the crisis era. Especially, but
apparently it was like a life-changing sort of experience. I'm like, wow, cool.
Yeah, I mean, being 17-year-old in Castle Hill might be more depressing than any other context of being 17. That being said, even if it's not really, I'm just going to say it is, just because, guys, if you lived being 17, even if you're 17 in Castle Hill now, that's pretty fucking bad, actually. My goodness, being anything but like under 12.
It's pretty different around there now, though.
Anything but under 14 in that suburb is miserable. But whatever, we don't need to go on about that.
Yeah, move on the next one, I guess.
I think one more thing I want to say about Shaman, Idris Akimura and the Pyramids. It's just what did I say? If I would ever claim something self-indulgent, the factor for me is too much repetition. To be honest,
right.
That's the only time I would ever call something. Although that would be the main reason I ever would in any genre. Yeah, there's some of the 70s free jazz albums, whether it's Alice Coltrane or Albert Heath.
I don't understand. How is repetition indulgent, though? Isn't it just repetition?
I mean, it just depends if you want to hear it or not.
Yeah, sure, but how's that self-indulgent? You know what I mean?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily self-indulgent.
That's just the one thing I
find it a bit...
I'm asking out of genuine curiosity because I don't understand. I want to be able to understand why people describe it as self... Do they think the jazz artist who's repeating the notes is, like, getting off on it or something?
No, it just means you'd rather listen to something else, that's all.
Yeah, sure. But that's hence why repetitive or boring, you'd say, rather than self-indulgent, right?
Me personally, yeah.
Yeah, sure. I guess when I say, like, I'm thinking more generally here, like, as to the people who always use those sort of descriptive terms.
Yeah, I think when people use... I know that indulgent is something that, like, you know, people who know their music theory will say sometimes, but obviously that's not where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I just don't get where they're coming from with that. Could someone, if they know, please let me know.
I think some people have a certain idea that, like, certain stuff's, like, is going too far because then it's like too much to wrap your head around. I mean, I don't know. I don't.
Perhaps because that is sort of what people say about the next artist.
Yeah, I mean, look, like, there's a big endorsement here for Shaman. We might talk about some more free jazz albums in the future, but if not, it's just good to give this one a good give the genre in general representation.
Yeah.
And also, I like to point out modern albums that I really, really like. And here's one from the last few years, and just because we talked about this a lot more than I expected. We probably might have talked about this more than any of the previous ones for this show. Actually.
Probably, and it's worth it.
Oh, it's worth it. This is absolutely awesome. And it's good to know that 3.56 other people seem to like it.
Nice.
As opposed to the...
and there'll definitely be more free jazz at some point, certainly.
And now we can finally take a breath and move on.
Yeah. I'm kind of glad that was a long one before, and we were sort of talking about gripes with music criticism, so I don't really have to do it much on this album, which is sort of a key part to its narrative or non-narrative or whatever. Maybe...
Loose narrative
that maybe about 30 people in the world have been observing, and that's about it.
Yeah.
This is Lunch in the Park by Sun Kill Moon from 2020?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
2021, sorry, 2021.
2021, yeah.
This
was when it was released. But
this is the first appearance of the major songwriter, major American balladeer, troubadour, Mark Kozlek himself.
Yeah, Mark Kozlek, Sun Kill Moon, Red House Painters fame. Been around for a while. I think he's in like his 50s now. All his songs sort of reflect that. Very biographical songs, And, I guess I thought this was a 2020 album because
there's a song called November 2020 on there.
And it's
It's from February 21, so it was it's all about 2020, let's assume.
And I guess it's my personal sort of like COVID album in as far as it captures the zeitgeist of that era. But yeah, that's one of the running motifs and themes that permeates all throughout this album. This is a kind of beautiful album in a way. Just like... In its simplicity, in its sort of like starkness, like this album cover of just a sort of digital photo of a park bench in the San Francisco Bay really does evoke the sort of sound of the album. And I guess to describe it, it'd just be like a mixture of, sort of outsider indie folk tunes along with like sort of modern minimal soft and spacey synth sort of songs. And there's just something about this album that it screams interesting, eccentric, very well written, like outsider music. And it's a very sort of personal album, but also very, at least I feel, very much like captures the sort of paranoid, nervous zeitgeist that was 2020. And it's just sort of chock filled with fairly long, interesting, people would describe as indulgent or like rambling biographical songs. But like I was saying before, that it's got a few motifs that permeate throughout it. Things like COVID, modernist books that he'll tell you the synopsis of.
John Fontaine named dropped quite a lot.
Quite a lot. Henry Miller, yeah. And, another running motif are like these two doves that just randomly popped up on his, fire escape. And all these, like, running themes and motifs sort of weave into each other in a very intricate and, like, sort of, like I said, beautiful way. It's funny that he's name-dropping all these modernist books and literature. Like, maybe that's why people would describe something like this as self-indulgent. They think it's just some guy name-dropping it. But really, he's learnt from these things. And he's incorporating it into his songwriting and his music and created this dense, layered style of songwriting that kind of hasn't been done yet. And is taking cues from cross-textual analysis of literature and pop culture and just various other things. And it's just such a creative style of songwriting. And, it's just mixed with this sort of... Like, it's not the most interesting sonic atmosphere because each album that Sun Kill Moon has done is kind of a different sonic atmosphere. It's going for a different thing.
Yeah, I think that's true.
But all using, especially after Benji, using this style of sort of like modernist songwriting, for lack of a better term. You get what I mean if you hear it. And it, this album has this sort of, it feels like you're wrapped in a blanket, while the world is closed down essentially. And the blanket also doubles as a sort of womb. It's this weird, it's very quiet in its mixing, and it's very echoey. And then the one consistent pattern you'll get is this sort of very a bass drum program noise that almost sounds like a heartbeat, and that's another consistent thing that'll run through it. So it's got a very unique sort of sonic landscape, and then it mixes it with this very classy, troubled, sort of tortured, and at the same time, I feel evocative and sort of universal style. It's I'm just sort of in awe at how someone can translate their internal monologue so perfectly into musical form, and then have it resonate with people on a more, at least like me, and I'm sure a few other people, on a more universal level, as if you've experienced all these things as well. It's just I don't think there's many songwriters who can claim to do stuff like that. And I could just go on and on about all the intricate details of all the reoccurring sort of lyrical themes and musical themes and stuff like that. But I think any listener to this would just be better off experiencing it themselves and have me describe it and just see what you think about it.
That's a great point. I was about to mention a couple of the topics which these songs cover, but I felt as though when you mentioned that, I suddenly think, no, I think you ought to, what we're saying I think is sufficient enough to go into the album, because and hear some of what's discussed, because that's the context, how autobiographical and personal it is, and then you can go into some of the more, I'll just say, let's say controversial stuff on this album, and hear it as knowing that it's not a man trying to preach a podium of how people ought to behave, but simply trying to document his pathology of that year.
Yeah, pathology is a great way to put it. Yeah, it's brave in a way.
It's incredibly brave.
Anyone who would think of it as someone trying to be on a soapbox and
proselytize.
And it's the opposite of proselytizing. If anything, it's an exercise in empathy.
Yeah, I feel like Kozilek is trying to make sense of what he's feeling.
He's trying to make sense of middle-aged depression, really. And how many albums are about that? None. It's all, any album that has to do with things like depression, it's all angsty teenage sort of stuff,
Okay, can I? We mentioned Rush before. I might share one album, which is, I've always admired. The songwriting's fairly good, but I really like the idea of the Presto album of these guys approaching 40, and it's totally about Neil Peart approaching 40.
That's interesting.
I mean, he wrote a song called I Think I'm Going Bald way back in 1975.
Yeah.
But that's what I've always really liked about, or wanted to like. I do really like Presto. I think I want to like it more than I do, partly because I can tell it's about that, and that's keeps me going back to it. Even sometimes some of the songs I'm just like, this isn't that inspired a melody or whatever.
Right.
I love what it's about.
Yeah.
I'm just, I guess, spoilers. One day on this program, I'd like to discuss Presto.
Yeah,
probably not the next couple, but one day, because it's one of their more interesting albums, even if it's not one of the most effective or successful. It's a brave album for these rock stars to. I mean, Hold Your Fire was a very, but how does it make you feel?
Yeah, you once mentioned, it's in the New Age school. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Definitely in its sonic spaces. Yeah.
Yeah. If it was new, Hold Your Fire was. So it's not that. It's kind of an organic. Travel from Hold Your Fire, to be fair. Anyway, we'll discuss Rush another time. I wonder what Mark Kozilek thinks of Rush.
Yeah. He's brought him up before in some lyrics. Yeah. Caresses of Steel he brought up. In a song called Bastille Day.
Oh, what record was that on?
It's on the Red as... what's it called? It's got a long name. Something is Red as Valleys of Blood. The 2016 album. It's the double album. That's another one of my favorites. That's
a Sun Kill Moon album, or was that just a Mark Kozilek album?
Sun Kill Moon, yeah. It's got a great cover as well. It's just him taking like a photo outside of his hotel room with like drapes and then a building.
Oh, this album, yeah, no, this album was. I remember listening to this in 2021 and thinking it came out in 2017, but I listened to it a few years later. I thought it was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's another weird experiment as well.
I gotta be honest. I mean, I'll proudly state, even at my peril, I think not just Benji, but everything that's come out since Benji's either a masterpiece or approaching masterpiece.
Yeah, approaching definitely. Yeah,
I know there's Mark Kozlek albums that are separate from the Sun Kill Moon titles, and I don't know those ones.
A lot of those are really good as well.
And some of those, like, I know some of those aren't quite to my taste, because we're talking, it's Mark Kozlek singing cover songs and stuff sometimes.
Sure, yeah. And those are the earlier ones, definitely.
Yeah, those are, I'm not as, I guess partly I just like the band and what they bring to the table of SKM.
Yeah,
possibly,
yeah.
Because we will talk about how, I mean, it's not like
the band is pretty much just him and a rotating lineup of various people who just get to, play certain instruments. For example, like Steve Shelley. He's probably one of the most consistent members since Benji, who was the drummer of Sonic Youth. Yeah. So that's kind of funky.
Steve Shelley, nice. But yeah, I think this is a really fantastic album. I remember I heard this. I did hear this in the year it came out. 2021 is the year I went back and I listened to. In 2020 itself, I'd heard Benji before, but I really got into it again when exploring the song, the final track on that album. Maybe the most well-known of them, Ben's My Friend, which is one of the best songs of the 2010s, I think, by anyone's standards, perhaps. And it's such a beautiful album. And then I saw no reason not to, when I had, a fair amount of free time in 2021 and living by myself as well, you can kind of play whatever you want without having to worry about boring anyone. So I can listen to like 5 albums from the same artist in a day. And so universal themes to Common as Light, to This Is My Dinner. My personal favourite is I Also Want to Die in New Orleans.
Oh, that album is brilliant. Yeah.
Welcome to Sparks, Nevada. I think that's the one that opens with, we're going on a road trip to... which one's the one that opens with going on a road trip? I think it's...
Sparks, Nevada is a spoken word one.
I think it's Common as Light, where it's like the first track, it's like... Yeah. I think it's because it's this track, God Bless Ohio, where he...
Oh, that song...
We're going to go on a road trip, and he's recounting all the excitement, getting everyone in the car... And that's a really, really nice piece.
I think that might be Universal Themes. Because God Bless Ohio is another one about his childhood.
Well, the opening track of the Universal Themes is The Possum. I doubt it's
No, that's not that. Yeah.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, that's...
But in any case, Lunch in the Park, up until this 2023 album called Quiet Beach House Nights, Lunch in the Park was the most recent, and I think it's fantastic. It continues this streak of really brilliant work from Kozlek and SKM. It's one of the best stretches of recorded music output in an artist's discography in recent years. It's some of the best music coming out right now, and I only feel very, 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 very slight shame about that. Like, just full disclosure, Kozlek's slightly controversial now.
Sure.
Like, if you
people like David Bowie though.
Jimmy Page, yeah. Look, guys.
People like Arcade Fire. Musicians are fucked up people. We all know it.
Yeah, I just like to make a quick, very brief disclaimer that if someone's out there who has been has experienced hurt, injury, or trauma as a result of Kozlek, I don't take that away from you.
No, I don't think no one would. Yeah, of course.
I'm documenting this man may be insensitive and potentially even a monster. I don't know him. I've never met him. I've never seen him live. I haven't been familiar with his music prior to, I said 2020 for SKM specifically, but I'll go into this in a moment, my proper history of Mark Kozlek, because it's mildly interesting, I like to think, even if it's not. But what I'm saying is, I'm openly amoral sometimes when it comes to appreciating music. I know that Roman Polanski is garbage. I still watch and admire some of the films he released, Tess and afterward, including Tess itself. Bernardo Bertolucci did some disgusting things, and everyone involved, Brando included, on Last Tango in Paris. Am I going to say I'm never going to watch, The Conformist or Last Emperor? No.
We've got to look at these things with a certain nuance as well, because, we can't just pretend that every fangirl is angelic, you know? It's kind of almost condescending to think that. And then with stories like this and Arcade Fire, you got to look at the who benefited from it being publicized, not the victims, even if they were. Allegedly, it's all alleged. Like, none of this ever went to any court.
No, that is worth bringing up. That is worth bringing up.
And the only reason why I got into the public lexicon in such a strong way was because of Pitchfork magazine. So a magazine, like essentially a tabloid, publishes a hit piece, you know? We got to look at these things with a certain degree of maturity, you know? Like you said, if anybody was legitimately hurt that we don't know, or, you know, is outside the realm of this morbid publicity world, no, everyone would sympathize with them. No one wouldn't, like, unless you're some sort of decrepit human. But on the other end, you just got to sort of acknowledge that people have especially like music publications like Pitchfork, which aren't even a proper music publication anymore. They're bought by GQ or whatever.
Oh, gross.
It's just it's not they're not the legal authority, and they're not even wise in that sense sometimes. Like, in a way, they even victimize people themselves, you know? They put these people out there in vulnerable positions, you know, rather than people getting them the help they actually need, you know? So, I'd refrain from sort of judgments on these things until they're actually properly dissected, you know?
Yeah,
I don't think anyone should feel like a sort of guilt over this stuff, because it's just it's childish, really.
Look, my position on this is, like, I tend to, I said, I view some of these works of art, like, with a degree of amorality. Think about an extraterrestrial observer looking at this stuff. Well, think about us as we observe let's say, like, our pet cat kills a rabbit, a nice, innocent, though invasive species rabbit, from, like, a local forest nearby. Like, I mean, that sucks. What if he kills a possum, a native animal? That's horrible, but, like, is our cat a piece of shit? No, and we're just animals at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And, like, we can try to be outside of the animal and sort of look at ourselves as a sort of psychological ecosystem, but I understand that, you know, some people prefer not to do that. I'm the kind of person, like, look, I think The Birth of a Nation is an amazing film. D.W. Griffith was a monster and had some very ugly, sordid, gross beliefs, but, you know, he's the father of the film medium in a way, and we owe everything to him. If anyone who watches a film owes something to D.W. Griffith. If you want to shit on D.W. Griffith, in a way, just don't watch films.
Sure.
It's as simple as that.
That's a good point, yeah.
He was a very wicked man. And he, you know, I mean, you can watch my videos on his films if you'd like to find out more, for example.
But even when people do awful things, like, calling them wicked and monsters, it's anti-human.
Look, I'm just trying to placate the...
Yeah, no, of course.
I understand why they do that.
That's why, like, I'm even disappointed. I didn't even want to get into this territory discussing this album, to be perfectly honest. Mm-hmm. So I find it disappointing that it has to be... Like, I have to defend things, especially when it's not even concrete. Like, you know, I wouldn't be sitting here defending, like, the music of... you know, what are they called? Gary Glitter or whatever, you know. One, because it's pretty terrible music, and two, because it was tried, you know, and it was definitely a thing. It wasn't he said, she said, or these, like, childish, like, adolescent sort of psychosexual things that get in the way of communication, you know. It just, I don't know. It's just, kind of, yeah, I don't know. I just find it kind of childish, to be honest.
Fair enough. I thought it was slightly relevant to the discussions we were having about Bobby Womack a few shows ago.
Yeah.
But I understand the perspective 100%.
Yeah. Well, it's similar to Bobby Womack, I guess, in a sense. Like I said, it's an exercise in empathy. So, like, if you want to understand these things, don't hide from them, you know? Get the help. And, like, understanding the pathology, if, say, like, a Bobby Womack or a Mark Kozelek are monsters... Isn't that a good thing? Isn't that something you want to do? That's like reducing ignorance. You can understand these things, you know? And especially if you're affected by them, perhaps trauma gets in the way of these sort of things. But like, isn't it just more enlightening, or at least, you know, conducive of empathy and understanding to be able to maturely deconstruct these sort of things, you know? And perhaps it's harder to do if you're directly involved, but yeah, I don't know, just it's a bit too philosophical for music, perhaps.
I think I can totally I can agree with a lot of that. And you know, part of what was fascinating about Kozilek to me, and it's not like by the time I got into Kozilek, I guess he'd become a slightly controversial figure, and even stuff that is on record is saying nasty stuff to a journalist or two. So he'd already been convicted before the controversial stuff occurred. This is around the time Benji had been successful. He was shitting on the war on drugs, which is warranted. I support that. The war on drugs, they stink. Beer. He's right. It's fucking beer commercial rock music.
Yeah.
But the reason why this recent stuff with Mark Kozilek partly is so fascinating to me, I'll just give it a little bit of context. I first got into Red House Painters when I was 18, and the year was 2014. I mentioned 2020 was the Benji thing. So I got into the Red House Painters albums, and I was aware of Benji, and I think I'd listened to it around the time, but it didn't grip me as much for some reason. And the Sunku Moon albums, even though that's not normally my favorite bands, is like, you know, at this time, I like King Crimson, I like Peter Gabriel Genesis, I like Rush. I also like a lot of post-punk and stuff, but that's just very, you know, production heavy and a lot of sonics and, you know, electronics in there, you know, which is very appealing to myself, and especially at that age and time. And so you'd think, well, how did I get into Red House Painters? Well, I mean, you know, some of these old acts like Velvet Underground and Sonic Youth had very long songs, so, you know, it was, but Red House Painters, I noticed they have, I download these albums, they're very acclaimed, the best ever albums in these sort of sites, and then you go to Wikipedia and there's at least 5 stars, so you download them, and Red House Painters is kind of a fascinating name. The aesthetic of the group, and it's a consistent aesthetic, is fascinating.
Yeah,
and
sure.
like, well, I was then, I still am now, fascinated by groups of a consistent aesthetic. I feel like they've got something to say.
Yeah,
Like, wow, the music sounds like that. Sure. That could be really good and interesting, captivating music, just sonically at least. And I had no idea that the lyrical content would be that and then some.
Yeah, sure.
But I first got into these songs because they were really long form and there was quite a lot happening. I liked instrumental music really a lot. I still do. And I really liked long songs which were epics and they left a big impression on you. And I thought like a lot of like cutesy wannabe pop was a bit corny. Like, I even like some of the Pixies trying to do that sometimes would bug me. And I really like the Pixies, for example. We saw them live that year, actually. At the Sydney Opera House. It was quite a great gig, actually, the gig itself. But the Red House Painters really appealed to me at that time. And I remember when I was 18, waiting for everyone to rock up to schoolies at the little hotel at the very exciting destination of the entrance. I didn't want to be at the Gold Coast. It's absolutely disgusting. And it's vile and all of that. Whatever. I'm just a Sydney person, I guess now. I was playing some albums, and the initial was the second album, sorry. The album that starts with 24 came on, and I'm 18, and listening to this song 24, and I'd had a bit of cannabis, and you know how it affects you at that age, quite densely, and I'm just thinking like, wow, where will I be at 24? Because there's lyrics like, at 16, I thought I'd have it figured out. And then at 18, I thought I had it figured out. I'm just thinking, and it's one of the most brutally existential experiences of my life, but also one of the most memorable.
It's a great song, yeah.
And that's a really great album. All those Red House Painters albums. I think the last one I don't like as much, which is a shame, but it's fine. The bluesy one.
Old Ramon.
Yeah, I think that's what it's called.
Old Ramon, yeah.
Yeah, I know Kozilek's disowned one of them. I really like that album. Yeah, songs for a blue guitar and Old Ramon. Old Ramon I probably like a bit more, but
Yeah, songs for a blue guitar is kind of like a solo album, really.
Yeah, I think that's the one I was thinking of, but Old Ramon as well is. That's alright.
Songs from a blue guitar sounds good when you speed it up and add reverb.
Excellent.
But you know what? I think I might sort of understand a little more why people want to kind of de-platform or de-emphasize or maybe not critically appreciate these sort of troubled musicians, because perhaps they feel that like when people appreciate music they're like idealizing these people or something like that. Whereas me personally, I've never like idealized like these people like a Bobby Womack or a Mark Kozilek. or like let's say Ray Davies, or
Yeah.
wild rock stars, David Bowie. Maybe people think because they make great music, they'll be role models for people or something.
Yeah.
But that's kind of adolescent and immature as well,
that's a good point.
Don't look at these musicians as role models, as people. Like, musically, of course, sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, the people aren't to be idealized. The music is, and like, appreciated. Like, the people are just people,
Oh, yeah.
With all the warts and all of people, especially people in, like, weird celebrity circumstances. What celebrity hasn't had a fucked up meltdown,
Oh.
So I think a key mistake there is people, maybe when, like, teenagers can more, like, sort of idealize these sort of people. But, like, similar to, like I was saying with it's the same with the men and the women at that young age. Like, the boys shouldn't idealize these people as role models, and the women shouldn't, like, the girls shouldn't idealize them as, potential whatever, those are both wrong things to do, and it's hard for late adolescents to, like, understand these things. But I just wish the adults in these people's lives would maturely intervene, with this sort of stuff,
Yeah.
Don't idealize these people. Appreciate what they create. But as people, they're just people, They're like you and me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we inferred the David Bowie thing before, but also
Sure.
I was, without even thinking of that, not that I feel that I have to necessarily, but I was just praising Low as like one of the greatest things I've ever heard. And like, it doesn't, I can do that. Like, it doesn't, I didn't even think twice about it.
Yeah, no, exactly.
That's,
yeah.
I'm, I don't care. Like, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Like, what am I going to do? What's how should I feel?
Sure, no, it's these sort of things are just yeah, it's sort of like parasitic outside narratives that get in the way of the music, at least. Like, you can isolate these things, like you said. It might not even have to necessarily be amoral, unless you're listening to, like, skinhead hardcore punk or whatever.
There are levels, yeah.
There are certain levels of, like, interactivity with the ideas,
Yeah.
Like, if some artist was making, like, music that is literally, like, telling you to do illegal things, of course that's where you're just like, no. There's
a lot of controversy about that recently in the United States, I feel.
Sure. With some, like,
Perhaps
gangster songs,
rightfully
stuff
so,
like
really.
that. Yeah. But with the gangster stuff, you gotta, like, to some degree, have a sort of suspension of disbelief, because, like, a death metal band's like Cannibal Corpse really telling you to skin people alive and stuff.
Yeah.
It's vaudeville.
Yeah, you got to distinguish from artist to artist at least.
Yeah.
I mean, if
Yeah,
seriously.
Yeah, this album, there's a lot to talk about.
One more point I want to make is that but when I was into Kozilek and Red House Painters when I was 18, I wasn't idealizing him as a human.
Sure.
What was happening was I was kind of using it as a vision of what I might feel like, or what being in your mid-20s could feel like.
Yeah.
And so I'm projecting, looking for, and there's this sort of this foreshadowing going on, which I thought was absolutely riveting and sort of compelling. And then when I did get to my mid-20s, I'm listening to his music as like a middle-aged man, and kind of, and this similar thing is happening. And so that's what I've always found in my life story what gripping about the music of Mark Kozilek. And
Yeah,
this
sure. That's
this
interesting,
repeated
yeah.
experience I had with the guy and his two different acts, Red House Painters and then SKM Sun Kill Moon a bit later on. And that's about as much as I feel, at least psychologically or even just mentally compelled, intellectually compelled to share about Mr. Kozilek and this album here. I've talked a while about this one. And
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in a similar vein, I guess I sort of really started to delve deep into this guy's music after hearing, like, the second track on this album on Shuffle whilst tripping acid. And then later in the trip, one of the songs off the Red House Painters Roller Coaster album came on. And just hearing the stark retrospective progression, like, backwards.
Wow, yeah.
It was such a fascinating sort of... I was like, wow, I gotta really, like, listen to this guy's music.
Yeah.
Because it painted such a weird picture. So, yeah. Let's move on to the next one, I guess.
Aye, King Buffalo. This is what we call sort of stoner rock, psych metal. And they were formed, perhaps still based in Rochester, New York, over in the US. They've released albums since 2016, 5 of them. This is the third one from 2021, The Burden of Restlessness. Look at that illustration. Don't you want to listen to that, mother? They've released 2 albums since then, Acheron in 2021, Regenerator in 2022. My samplings of at least these 2 more recent ones, they're also pretty good. The Burden of Restlessness. What I really like about this one is I've always really, really appreciated certainly the idea of stoner metal, and some groups really fulfill the promise. Sleep from back in the day, Electric Wizard from back in the day, but you listen to Electric Wizard's subsequent... Actually, some Electric Wizard's subsequent albums are really good, but there's also a part of you that's like, there's something more that needs to be done here. And then, fortunately, in 2020, in Greece, Acid Mammoth came along. But I've already slobbered over Acid Mammoth on Cosmic Criticism. Not that I haven't had repeats of certain Cosmic Criticism reviews, if you want to call them reviews. That came here. There was one of why Bells Are Cup, and we did that in the first episode, for example.
Sure, yeah.
And I'm going to do repeats in future, I have no doubt about it. Just because, these albums, some of them are very good, and there's more worth saying. But Burden of Restlessness was another one of the, Acid Mammoth and Acid Hoof, I'm thinking, oh, finally, I don't know if it's just me loving both. Just Acid and Mammoth. Nothing has made me want to listen to a group more than those 2 words in conjunction with one another, and all the artwork associated with them, of course. They've got a couple albums, and I think they're all really, really good, actually. But, and then I hear this one, King Buffalo's The Burden of Restlessness, and this is another instance of, this is what I always wanted the genre to sound like. Not that I found myself disappointed by Sleep. Actually, even newer Sleep album, I was a bit let down by, to be honest.
Yeah, I think I listened to, the lead single they put out before the album ever released, and I was just like, it's not dope.
Yeah, no, it's 2018, The Science.
Yeah.
So it's not actually that new.
No, but I remember listening to that when it was new and being just a bit like,
I didn't think it was that amazing.
Yeah, it's good, but it's not. It's just Sleep, as you know, though.
And also, I do remember, I think it was 2017, which went the Electric Wizard album, the most recent one. I think it's called Wizard, Bloody Wizard, and it's more like traditional metal. Here's the thing, Electric Wizard was if Electric Wizard was like Sabbath on steroids, some of the newer stuff tried to sound a bit closer to 70s Sabbath, which is fine, but I just preferred Electric Wizard as Electric Wizard.
Yeah.
I feel like it's
that's
kind
a
of
good way to
back,
put it, yeah.
They're kind of going back a little
They
bit.
did their own thing with that.
Don't get me wrong, it's better than Black Sabbath 13. So that's
sure,
that's I don't know if that's the most difficult thing in the world to be better than Black Sabbath 13. but yeah, this particular release, the King Buffalo album, it's not as dense and wall of soundy. If anything, the layers of your vocals, guitar, bass, drums, they're all kind of precise, and sometimes the guitar lines will function like a creepy gothic synth line.
Yeah, no, and they'll layer they'll make it's very harmonious. They'll dub over someone playing the exact same lick, but it'll be in a higher tone on the guitar, a higher note, a higher pitch. Sorry.
Yeah.
And so it creates these synthy sort of harmonies, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, we got powerful lyrical imagery about waking up on the floor, about anticipating the end of the world.
Even
carcasses.
Slint-esque, the spoken word section again.
Yeah, this is the kind of album that, I talked about being 18 in 2014 earlier. I wish this came out then, and then we could have enjoyed it then.
Sure.
Just because, we're not that we don't listen to this music now, but there's a certain atmosphere of seshing in parks, you know what I mean, guys.
Yeah.
You're putting hands over someone else smoking so that the wind doesn't blow out the lighter flame. This is the kind of thing. We would have loved this back then, and it's just there's not much of a motivation to go out and smoke up in parks and forests when you can do so warm indoors and with speaker systems and blah, blah, blah.
Oh, smoking in parks is a game for 16 and 17-year-olds.
Yeah, you don't want to be in your mid-20s and there's other, there's late adolescents there and you're like, okay, maybe we shouldn't be here now.
Yeah. Because, I knew some people from back then that were like that and they just seemed a bit sad.
Okay.
Yeah.
But in any instance, I think this is the King Buffalo album. This might be the one as opposed to the Free Jazz one, which I don't have so much. This was just an instance where I felt as though this is great. This might not get enough. Oh, I know I did have some things to share about this. Excuse me, but it's not related to the album itself so much as the context of the people who listen to this sort of music and where it would get reviewed online. But I wanted to promote this one. Part of the reason I like bringing this stuff to the table is because I like hearing my co-hosts think of these things, and it to me it's a very enjoyable and satiating, gratifying example of a genre I have a lot of love for, and it's always been a great soft spot for me. Big fan of King Buffalo's The Burden of Restlessness. Would you want to share any more thoughts on this before I go to like some other details about, I guess, the context of what this album makes me think of in like the wider online music discourse culture?
Yeah, I guess I'll just chime in with what I appreciated sonically about it was like the things you described. It's a great... Yeah, now that you mention it, it does remind me of like the sort of music that you'd listen to as a adolescent, seshing in parks and things like that. And it's got a great sort of stoner quality over it. But what I also really liked about it was it took these like some of the productions like ideas from like 2010 shoegaze revival sort of stuff and shoegaze metal, and just put it into metal in such a creative way. And this is another one I listen to with headphones actually for the most part. And man, it's got such a moments of like dense walls of sound, and then it'll pull right back and be sort of stripped back for a little bit, just focusing on like a bass line, or perhaps like what kind of sounds like programmed drums at some point, though there is definitely proper like a drum kit on there. And then I just love the it reminded me so much of, I would have talked about Hum the other week. Yeah. I just love that sound of, again, it fits into shoegaze, where the vocals are done through this sort of phaser effect, and they just have such a spaciness to them that it really is a great way to, it mixes into the, like, sort of metal in a much more natural way than traditional vocal styles. And so it's able to make it turns what you like music done mostly with rock instruments into like feeling like sort of alien music in a way, like it just metal that's traditionally earthy is now in outer space. It's a sound that I can really get behind. It's a lot of fun and just oh man, it's good for just like spacing out. You just sort of kick back and let it wash over you.
Yeah, I mean, well, first thing I want to mention is King Buffalo. If you're ever touring Australia, somehow let us know. I'd love to see you guys and pay you guys some well-earned money, and I'll shout you some stuff for some certain subcultural lifestyle choices if you feel so inclined, and in case you don't want to have to smuggle certain things through the airport, we got you covered. Over in Sydney at least. I don't know about Melbourne, but they've got pretty good stuff down there, I believe. Anyway.
Yeah, so what's the discourse on this album?
Okay, so this is the kind of thing that would be reviewed on Sea of Tranquility that I actually like.
Okay, sure.
And the thing is, there's more to be done within the stoner metal paradigm, I feel, because it was never the most... Look, back in the day, you needed a studio and a record deal and all this other nonsense in order to get records out there. Now it's a lot easier. Home studios are a lot better than they used to be. A lot more independent labels than they used to be. Easier to get music out there via the internet, and for little labels to make money off of this stuff now. So they can make a living, potentially, by just putting out niche music now. Because it's not like you need to set up a record shop in like a major city or whatever, which with enormous rent. You just need some office with some computers, and it could be in your home. Have the band send you the files, and then you can put them up in there and host them, and the fans can pay whatever they want theoretically for them. They can listen to it for free elsewhere, and then choose to pay for it. You get more, if you want to promote gigs, you've got more fans than ever. If you want to promote a gig, you say, hey, post it online. Hey, here's a video of the guys playing. Here's the album. You can stream it. And so, you don't even have to say, hey, go to the gig, buy the record if you want to hear the music. There's no concept of... The people don't have to put in the same effort that they used to. And so bands can get fans. And I guess the point I'm making is I feel as though this kind of music is a lot more interesting, even though it doesn't seem like it would be, than neo-prog or other forms of, metal music. Because wasn't there maybe there's more to be done in genres that I don't care for as much, like thrash metal. I mean, thrash metal's okay, some of the stuff from back in the day is good, but you know, sometimes I wonder, even just things like jazz fusion, I'm thinking like, what else can we do? Whereas, like I said, like this is a kind of album I feel like, well, why hasn't this come out yet? Like this we would have loved this back in the day, and this is where I'm crossing over and thinking like, yeah, like this is where I'm endorsing some of these channels like Sea of Tranquility promoting their kind of new music. Like this is where we're going to cross over. But if we're just going to be pointing out like any number of bands that like, I'm not interested in listening to bands that wish that in a way that punk never happened and that the prog bands who have just been big forever, and that Marillion ought to have been the biggest band of the 80s instead of fucking Kajagoogoo or whatever. But I don't agree with that. I think like, I mean, isn't it pretty obvious that the prog bands like felt as though there was nothing else to say? Is Going for the One in Tomato not indication that there was nothing else to say, and Drama an indication that the 80s was the way forward?
Yeah.
I'm not the biggest fan of the next two Yes albums. They could be worse. But, like, I'm just saying, like, Robert Fripp felt as though there was nothing else to be done. Robert Fripp goes to New York. Like, this is Robert Fripp.
Yeah.
Like,
was
he wrong? Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. Like, it's just like...
Yeah,
ELP,
no,
ELP did Works.
I don't think you could put it more
Works?
succinctly. Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Who's listening to Works? Love Beach is better than Works. Love Beach is funny. And that last track of Love Beach is a genuinely really good prog track. The Officer and Gentleman thing. That's good stuff. Not gonna lie. I mean, Works had the Pirates, but that's good. I think I had fanfare for the Common Man as well. But
yeah, Fripp going to New York. That's Darmok and Gelada Tanagra. That's all you gotta say, and that's definitely 100% true.
Like, look, I mean, yeah, I guess what I'm saying is...
Unless you only like the first King Crimson album, then, you know, you're a bit of a dork.
Those people are dork. I was just if AOD's calling you a dork, like, wake the fuck up, guys. And I'm just saying, Sea of Tranquility, like... Fuck half the shit you review. Most of the stuff on the 2023 best of list was shit. I sampled it. Sampled not in a song or anything. I listened to it.
You use the EMU emulator.
I don't. I'm not that experienced with this sort of thing, I'm afraid. But no, I listened to some of the stuff and some of it's good, but most of it's just fucking like fuck this shit. And I don't need it. And it's just navel gazing and just like, oh, I wish I was around in the 70s. Oh, like this sort of music never should have like stop being popular. And it's just like, you know, like making Led Zeppelin a genre with like, you know, some of these new bands. Like what's that big new band? What's that one?
What? Wolfmother?
Black Country Communion, I think they're called.
Oh, okay. I've heard that name, but I haven't.
Greta Van Fleet. Like fuck this shit. Fuck this shit. Don't need it. We need King Buffalo.
King Buffalo.
I'm going to end it here and we can move on. Sorry. I don't want to shit on Sea of Tranquility too much because I don't hate them. I still love Martin Popoff. He's the Marshall McLuhan of heavy metal.
Yeah, that's a good description. Marshall McLuhan, yeah. Canadian. Oh, jeez.
Alright, so we got your next one. Oh, this is quite a good one.
Speaking of Canadian, Canada-IO, eh? Yeah, Nick Jones, Penguin Eggs, 1980, I think?
Yes.
Yeah. Man, this guy seems like an interesting...
He's not Canadian, is he?
No, he's not Canadian.
Yeah.
He's English.
Yeah.
The first song's some strange, like, sea shanty about, I guess...
Canada.
Yeah, about, like, a town in, I guess, northern Canada or something, or, like, Newfoundland or something like that. But, yeah, no, this is an album that, I guess, like, a mate would have just recommended to me as, like, a... sort of like a folk classic. I guess it's regarded within the folk realm as a sort of classic album. And I was like, oh, cool. This first track, this is great. I got to listen to this album. So I ended up listening to it as I'm like waiting to get a train, a rural train from Sydney out into the country. And man, what a first place to hear an album like this. Like, it definitely encapsulates that feeling of, you know, journeying out from a city into sort of, into rural territory. And it's sort of, especially in Australia, it's got this very, like, sort of pastoral, you know, rural heart, you know. But, so it fit the aesthetic of that sort of trip very well. But regardless, it's just a interesting, very, like, crisp sort of productive take on, I guess, traditional folk music. And just done from I suppose, like a savant or like an expert guitar player. Very rarely is an acoustic guitar player going to like sort of blow me away with their stylings and stuff like that and their technique and make just a guitar sound like it's a whole band or something, you know, just an acoustic guitar. It's very, it makes you think there's a very sort of like credible tradition in that within folk music. And, yeah, they're just all like, kind of, they're all great songs and all got it sort of very well arranged and very well recorded. When, you know, a lot of this folk music is, you think of it as something you watch live, not on an LP or something. But this is, or you know, you sing with folk, you know. Whereas this sort of is able to capture that sort of intimacy on an LP in such a visceral way. So that's the first thing that really caught me about this album, is like its aesthetic and its technique and able to sort of, its ability to sort of captivate you with these like, kind of old traditional songs. And I guess to one degree I'm just a sucker for like sea shanties and stuff. Mm-hmm. Like there's something about existential like love themed sea shanties that are very true. Like they're and there's a few of them on this album. And then a few more sort of like, you know, polka style, you know, almost like Gaelic songs. Yeah. So there's a variety of like British English folk tradition on it. And regardless of that, I think because I'm not really a folk person necessarily, even though the last three choices of mine are folk albums, and the first one is a electronic album, very much in the folk. You know, Martin Newell is he is the folk in a way, so it's in that tradition rather than, you know, necessarily just the accordion and acoustic guitar style, hurdy-gurdy style of music. Sure, you know. Sure. So yeah, there's just something about these like three albums that are within that tradition that like they make me sort of when I hear this sort of stylings of music, I'm just like, oh, okay, this is why people like folk music, you know. And it's very rare for something like that to do that for me. I think it shows that there's a certain implicit, like, you know, inherent sort of heart to this style of communication that it's sort of, it's timeless in a way, you know. And even though it's being captured on a disc or digitally or whatever within the physical material realm of the year it's, you know, recorded, it's still, I feel like it permeates itself throughout the human condition in the same way that African folk music, like the drumming stuff does, you know, or all regional folk music. Even though I'm not as well versed in things like Chinese and Korean folk music, I've heard some of the like percussive Korean stuff is like, I'm like, oh my god, this is like universal music, you know? So I find it really fascinating that like an album from 1980 can sort of permeate that, you know? It must mean that there's a really interesting person behind it. And yeah, it seems like this guy, Nick Jones, was a really interesting sort of figure within that world. The English like folk revival world, which I'm not too familiar with, but listening to something like this really wants me to get more into it, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's just so down to earth and classy at the same time, you know?
Yeah.
So it's just, it's a if you don't like folk music, then give this one a listen. It might convert you. And like I was mentioning before, just quickly before I pass it off to you,
sure.
With the Jazz Rate Your Music reviews, there was a really like funny review of this album on Rate Your Music, which is just a guy's anecdote of how he hates folk music because of this one experience he had where he was like, he fell asleep on a train, and then he woke up about 5 or 10 minutes later, and suddenly the whole, like, the carriage was empty when he fell asleep, but when he woke up 5-10 minutes later because it had stopped at the next station, suddenly the carriage was full and everyone in it had like an obscure Anglo folk instrument. And the guy sitting next to him was a guy with a hurdy-gurdy. He's like, what the hell? And he just described, like, you have to read this. The anecdote is so good. So, like, anyone listening out there, definitely look up this album's review on Rate Your Music and read this guy's review. It's hilarious. He's just talking about how this hurdy-gurdy man is looking at him the whole time, knowing that he's pissed off, but they still are playing and smiling along sardonically, knowingly just pissing this guy off. But even despite this like awful experience, he can still appreciate this album. And I'm like, fuck, that must mean this is like an amazing album.
Yeah, that's I found it here. P_Q. This was published on May 30th, 2018. He gives it 3 stars out of 5. Fascinating. Yeah, I suppose I'll give my brief, or however long it ends up being, spiel on the Penguin Eggs here.
Yeah.
Okay, so, well, firstly, I think it's first worth saying, and this is the obvious thing, perhaps. Nick Jones is one of the most tragic lives in the history of recorded music.
Yeah, that is a tragic story.
This is incredibly depressing. After this record, he was involved in a rather serious motor vehicle accident, and he survived, but he found himself unable to play guitar in the same way that he used to, and the fiddle he was not able to play to the same capacity whatsoever. So Nick Jones mostly retired solely from recording music. Maybe he played in some capacity here and there.
Yeah, I think years later he started touring again.
But otherwise it really does break one's heart. And listening to Nick Jones' Penguin Eggs, I realized something, that there was this. One I realised, but I don't even know if I've always considered myself the biggest fan of folk music, but I think I realise now, that's just all that like wanky American folk music.
Yeah.
I think I've always had a soft spot for the Fairport Convention, I've heard. That friend of ours adores the Sing Steel Ice Band, put out the greatest albums of all time. Some of them are very good. And, you know, Richard Thompson's the greatest songwriter of all time, or whatever. And then, of course, now we get to Penguin Eggs by Nick Jones. That English troubadour tradition was very real. So English language songwriting and a lot of popular songwriting worldwide, Western culture at least, is downstream of that English troubadour folk bard tradition. That we all know so well from popular culture, popular English language culture, you know. And I think it's so telling that, you know, we talk about like, oh, all this popular music of the 20th century was British. What's all the British dominating this and that? They have a smaller population than America. What's going on? How are they competing? It's in their blood, I think, still. And it's just in their culture. It's so ingrained to put these songs out. And then so when you get to John Lennon and Paul McCartney, and then the Ray Davies, Mick Jagger, Keith, whoever you want to name from that era, Sid Barrett, it's no wonder that it's so organic to these guys. Like it's seamless to them. And so when some people decided rather that they were going to take a even more traditional approach with this songwriting, and we get to Nick Jones in 1980 with Penguin Eggs, and with modern production, but very traditional, and it makes you realize why these songs were considered so beautiful. And I'm listening to this in an afternoon shift in a location which I've often referred to as my Innisfree, which, to those of you who don't get that reference, Innisfree is the fictional town in John Ford's, this Irish town in John Ford's classic film from 1952, The Quiet Man, starring John Wayne. And Innisfree is this idyllic, necessarily fictional location. And I've referred to this one location in my life as my little Innisfree, and I play music when I'm there, often, and it really, Innisfree rarely emanated more than when playing. Not that this is an English album, not an Irish album, but maybe I played some Irish folk music.
The folk music traditions are tied together.
Yeah, very, very true. And it really emanated. And you know what? I could play this music. This was the music that I've played at that location, which I suspect, and I was to some degree. I don't play the music very loud because there are other people around, and I need to focus to some degree some of the time there, absolutely. But this was the music which I suspect if I played it loud, people would have the least complaints about.
Sure.
It's so universal, especially it's so tranquil and beautiful, and it just, people don't even like notice it. It just becomes like a nice bird chime or something to them.
Yeah, bird song. Yeah.
People really it would be impossible for them to complain, I suspect. And I think it makes you realize how alive that English songwriting tradition was. And it's like this guy came along who was this temporally displaced missing link between like the Paul McCartneys and the Martin Newells. Like, you can see why Martin Newell sees someone like Paul McCartney of the Beatles as a hero, and then he creates this sort of like timeless English troubadour music but then someone like Nick Jones is going right back to the source. You know, it's you could see why there was this puts English songwriting tradition in a fantastic perspective, and it's a gorgeously produced album. It's beautifully arranged, and
yeah, it's very well produced.
I suspect, did anyone love music more than Nick Jones? Because him singing these songs, him putting the effort to arrange these songs, this man had so much love for what he did that it makes you question. It could make you question your faith that what happened. Like it's really. Really good listen.
Question your
never
faith.
Really heard of it.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, it seems like it's a sort of, it's an unknown album outside of like people who are really into English folk music.
When I look it up on Wikipedia, there's quite a bit of information about it. But
So
if you know about it, it's a very big deal.
Yeah.
Like out of curiosity, you know some older English individuals at a certain workplace or two you frequent. Anyone ever mention Nick Jones?
None of them who've, like, I don't know many of them who are really into, like, the folk music, to be honest. Yeah. It's more into the punk music.
Yeah.
Because they're sort of that age bracket.
Yeah.
But it's funny that you said, like, it's a sort of music that you might lose your faith, because it's interesting, it's very, still in that folk sort of world, it's kind of mischievous. Because I think the third track on it, called, like, The Humpback Whale, apparently it's credited as a traditional song. But supposedly it's actually a song by an Australian guy from like 1973. So in like some sort of proto like internet piracy way, he may have like either accidentally or mischievously like credited the song as a traditional. But you know, and then like made it into this sort of traditional form. I wonder what the original sounds like.
Yeah,
but and once again in the mischievous folk tradition, apparently the opening track Bob Dylan put on like one of his 90s albums because he'd heard the Nick Jones's version of it and was like, and supposedly I haven't heard it, but apparently according to like the Wikipedia, it's like it's arranged nearly identically. So Bob Dylan's gone and then just sort of lifted this like guy who's probably unknown in England's like arrangement of a song. So it definitely. There's something kind of mischievous about folk music I really appreciate as well. It's like, it's like a proto form of like internet anonymity, you know?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, a really good listen. I wouldn't have listened to it. You mentioned the album to me a little while ago, and I can't say I would have listened to it as swiftly unless it was arranged to be discussed for a Mandala program.
Yeah.
I'm really glad to listen to it. Really good stuff.
Yeah, I guess I chose it just because I've been listening to it quite a bit. Yeah, because it's just sort of, it's infectious in a way.
Well, yeah, you know, I encourage any guest to pick the albums that they're going to have the easiest time talking about, you know, like the least of a burden, the ones where, like, you don't have to, like, think too hard about what you're going to pick, you know, you're just like, oh, the albums where you think...
I can't say I've been thinking about any of them.
Yeah, like the albums where, like, if you were set a few albums to talk about, the albums where you think, oh, I'd rather talk about that, and that. That's what I want that's what I want discussed.
Yeah.
Because that's what matters, I feel. That's my bit on Penguin Eggs done, I think.
Yeah. Next one.
Okay, so I'm going to be discussing here another rather heavy album, although this one's disappointingly not that I know of, and I did look, discussed on the Sea of Tranquility, and that's a real shame.
Yeah, that is.
Because this Belgian act, Absent in Body, Plague God 2022, look at this Cthulhu skull.
Do they talk about this sort of style of like doom death sort of stuff though?
I would imagine so.
Okay.
As far as I know, correct me if I'm mistaken.
Yeah, I haven't seen enough of it. I've never really seen them talk about the really extreme stuff. Or at least I've never heard Pete Pardow talk about extreme.
Oh yeah, I've heard like Hudson Valley Squares people mention this stuff. But
yeah.
Is this the stuff that he reviews on the Wednesday? I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe he's more like fusion prog, hard rock, and I don't know, whatever the hell else.
Yeah.
Stoner stuff. He does review the Stoner stuff. There is a ranking the albums of King Buffalo. Like they have some stuff, you know, they've gotten attention on there. Partly because they're based SOT and they were based in New York. So then King Buffalo are a New York band, so it probably helps.
Oh yeah, that definitely would.
But Absent in Body, Plague God, this is a bit similar to... the reason this is brought up, like King Buffalo, all this stuff is like very recent. I tried to pick albums from the last few years that I really liked because it's just, we don't need to go over the old shit from the 20th century again and again and again. Like, great stuff's coming out all the time. CJ Cool is not wrong about that.
Yeah,
it's just we disagree on the stuff.
Like, you don't need to pick, like, Black Sabbath. We know, you know what I mean?
I've listened to those albums dozens of times. They're brilliant. But, like, we all agree that they're brilliant.
Yeah, it's
maybe somewhere down the line, but, like, that's only if I feel like I got something unique to say.
Yeah.
You know, like, I'm definitely not going to discuss, like, Paranoid or something, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, I did CC, Cosmic Criticism on Paranoid, but that was more just my point with that video was I wish there was more Sabbath knockoffs from the time, you know what I mean? Because I would love I just wish there was more music like that with that particular recording fidelity of the 70s, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Many bands try it now. That's great. I love a lot of them too. I once heard it.
That first Uriah Heep album's kind of good for
that's the best Uriah Heep album.
Yeah.
I love that album. I love Very Heavy, Very Humble. It's great. Great stuff. And I love the group, like, you know, Writing on the Wall, Coven, like all these little groups. Spooky music from that era. Comus.
Oh, sure.
Comus has been pointed out before.
That's definitely mischievous.
Comus is like playing the Evil Dead tape, you know, where they in the basement.
It kind of is like
Diana. Uh-oh. What have I done?
Yeah, all the strange...
If you're playing that on record, you'd be like, uh-oh, I probably should turn this off. I've conjured something. This isn't good.
Yeah, it's just full of...
One of the great things ever recorded.
That's a great... See, that's the sort of...
That's got a lot of praise nowadays, and I couldn't be happier.
Yeah.
It's right up there and rate your music. People adore it. I mean, I became aware of it in 2016, and I wouldn't have if it hadn't already had some momentum.
It was like a popular YouTube video, yeah. That's how I found it.
I think I saw it as a Discogs recommendation.
Oh, wow, okay.
Or maybe, I
guess it must have had...
No, because if you looked at prog lists, Comus would come up on prog lists, and I was like, what's Comus?
That's interesting.
So that was like, they had a second album, but it wasn't as avant-garde. It's actually fairly good, but it's more conventional. They have a later album, which I listened to once and I thought it was quite good.
Okay.
It's trying to be more like First Utterance.
Yeah, nice.
Same people. Quite good. Quite good to my memory as opposed to fucking 13 or whatever.
13.
But anyway, sorry. Sorry, Absent in Body. We're supposed to be talking about your 2022 release, your only release thus far, Plague God. These guys formed in 2015. I was never been the biggest metalhead, and not for lack of trying. When I was 17 and I first got into my first set of metal bands, Sabbath, Maiden, Priest, Slayer, Metallica, whoever you want to name, Pantera. I'm not into Pantera now, but, you know, Cowboys and Metal. Psycho Holiday's still a good song. That's how I got into Pantera, and I still stand by Psycho Holiday's a good song.
Is this a conspiracy? Oh, man, that album's hilarious.
Oh, man. But, like, these metal acts, I mean, like, I gotta be honest, like, I get into the big acts that form the subgenres, and then all the other bands of the subgenre, which everyone agrees are weaker anyway, I just find I have no reason to listen to them. I just think it's a big waste of time.
Sure.
Like, if they were just lesser Slayers, why wouldn't I just listen to Slayer? Those Slayer albums are as good as all the metalheads say they are. Absolutely.
Yeah, Slayer had
They're geniuses.
They invented that sound in a way.
Yeah, but the guys who knock them off, like, whatever.
Yeah.
Those Venom albums are great, but the albums that knock them off, whatever.
See, I guess those knockoff bands are like maybe what I was thinking about before, when people like idealize these sort of bands and just decide to replicate it completely.
Yeah.
Rather than like,
totally,
you know,
that.
have a sort of creative flow or something, you know?
And you know, like, there are metal albums here and there that I love. I like the slower stuff more from the 90s onward. Like, mentioned Sleep and Electric Wizard, also Acid Bath, also the sludgier stuff like Mastodon, Leviathan. And it's good we bring up sludge, actually, because this is listed. Rate your music, the genre in bold is atmospheric sludge metal.
Yeah.
Underneath is industrial metal and post-metal.
Yeah,
Atmospheric
post-metal,
sludge metal.
yeah, cool.
That's about right. Here's the thing. I listened to this album because I thought the cover was great.
Yeah.
And I was like, I mean, I may as well listen to a metal album. And I have been a bit more open-minded to recent metal because I listened to
experimental metal is good. Yeah.
I listened to a recent grindcore release. I was never a grindcore guy, but the illustration was so good. If I listened to Wormrot's album, just bear with me as I bring it up.
Sure.
But I don't normally listen to Hiss by Wormrot, and it's from 2022. And normally I don't listen to grindcore or anything like that. It's just a bit I find it a bit repetitive and mundane and like a bit harsh on the ears. Certainly I can't listen to it through headphones or anything like that.
Sure.
And like I just end up feeling like listening to something else. Even like punk variants of this sort of music are way more interesting to me.
Sure,
The metal stuff feels like it's trying a bit too hard, whereas the punk stuff feels more like this is the id, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
These are the Quatermass and the Pit. Martians, you know, kind of in the back of our minds.
No, yeah, some of the hardcore punk stuff is good for that sort of, yeah, definitely.
But, you know, and so Hiss was really, really good by Wormrot. So ever since then, and they're from Singapore, by the way, so it's kind of interesting too. Maybe
okay, that is interesting.
Yeah, but so,
because metal can be like internationalist or like universal in that way.
Acid Mammoth are from Greece, as I said.
Yeah. That's a good thing about metal. Like, often international metal, which is just, you know, disguised as American metal, is better, you know? Often. Though that band from New York,
King Buffalo,
King Buffalo are great.
Yeah. And, Sleeper from New York as well, I'm pretty sure, right?
I think so, yeah.
Obviously, Electric Wizard was a British act.
Yeah.
But yeah, with Plague God, Absent and Body, I'm listening to this, you know, it was one of the highest rated albums in the 2022. I remember, you know, I came across it at one point, and I never forgot the cover. I bookmarked it, and I listened to it, looking for something from 2022 to talk about, because I remember enjoying it. I listened to it again. I enjoyed it again very, very thoroughly. And I realized, like, oh, like, this is what I wanted the genre to sound like, and it does now. And I wish this came out in 2013, so 17-year-old AOD could have had a grand old time. This is the metal I kind of wanted to hear, but I never got. And now it's around, and we had to wait for some Belgians to kind of put it on record. Fuck, this is awesome. I want to listen to this on acid. Maybe not when we're peaking, but when it's fucking you're starting, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no.
Metal on acid is not something I've done enough. But we listened to Sleep a few times like that. We listened to the Volume 2 EP on acid.
Metal can be good on acid, yeah.
Hit. I listened to that King Buffalo album and as it was coming in once, and that was quite good. But I remember thinking the vocals were not the most suited to LSD. But again, I wasn't peaking yet or anything, fortunately, so it wasn't too bad. But they were a bit too 90s for me. I didn't feel that way when I was listening to it. Sober, but you know, I didn't feel that way when I was listening to it recently. You know, maybe sometimes I can be sensitive to certain things when I'm in a psychedelic state. Like even though, like I couldn't listen to Tom York's voice in a psychedelic state. Like, nah, turn it off. This is too much. When I don't like it that much when I'm sober anyway, so maybe that's why. Even though I quite like Radiohead's music.
Yeah,
like,
Tom York's vocals are pretty.
He's probably the least likable thing about Radiohead.
Yeah.
You've said that before, I'm sure.
Oh, a lot of people have, yeah.
Yeah. But no, I think Absent and Body by Plague God, like, I want more metal to sound like this. Atmospheric sludge metal, I guess, is this. Some people say, oh, what do you like metal? Oh, I'm going to be the guy who says, oh, I like atmospheric sludge metal. You know, some people go, I like technical death metal and shit. Like, oh, I like atmospheric sludge
like, I described it earlier as Doom, because it also reminds me of Doom. Like, metal subgenres are some, especially at this point in time, are kind of arbitrary, you know.
Yeah.
Especially, like, stuff like this, just blanket it into experimental metal, because it's trying to come up with new sounds. It's not just trying to be Black Sabbath again, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, my adoration for Black Sabbath just goes to prove, and the bands that are trying to be like Black Sabbath more so, but even stuff like, you know, I mentioned Acid Bath earlier, Mastodon, those aren't necessarily trying to be like Sabbath. I like slower metal. And even like, you know, how Martin Popoff would occasionally, and we've laughed about this is really funny, he says, I don't like slow Dio. Part of the reason why I like all of the Dio albums, except Magica, no one likes Magica, unfortunately, from 2000, I really like slower Dio. Like, I liked it when he did the slower songs in Sabbath. I like them when they rock up in the band. I think it's great. I like up-tempo Dio as well. That's awesome. But part of the reason... I mean, some of the slow Dio songs are kind of boring songs, but 50% of them are really good. And so that's why I really...
Depends on the bass groove.
Point. No, I agree.
Like Holy Diver has a great bass.
Holy Diver's fantastic.
That's just like...
No, that's Jimmy Bain. He was the man. He was a great bassist. I'm ashamed he wasn't with them the whole time, but like they had good bassists throughout. But like Jimmy Bain was like he'd been in a few bands. Like he's really good.
Yeah.
He like people love that guy. But yeah, no, like I think part of the reason I really like Dio is sometimes like he liked the slower stuff because he like, you know, he's writing vocals and he thought that was like a cool medium for vocal melodies and harmonies and stuff, and for him to test himself out.
Sure, with
show
the
off
sort of
live.
operatic thing.
Yeah, he loves that, you know. Love that, and that's kind of why I've always. So I really like the Dio discography. I love Dio Sabbath so much that like, and Dio the band was trying to continuing that the sound that was established in Dio Sabbath effectively, with Dio at the reins more so, and so that's why I've always really enjoyed the Dio discography. Like I like that kind of basic heavy metal, as in the film heavy metal. You know, that kind of 1980 heavy metal circa 1981. That's you don't need to get more extreme than that for me. I'm happy there. That kind of Nawabum adjacent sound. That's what I like. And the stoner stuff. I like the thrash stuff. I like Def the band are fantastic. There's some of the cool albums you can hear actually. But again, like even black metal, I just try to listen to dark ambient from like Western Europe or the UK. Or, you know, Burial and stuff or whatever.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Even stuff, you know, Aphex Twin, whatever, Audica. Like, look.
Is that how you pronounce that band?
Ask your older brother, I guess.
I've always wondered, yeah.
But no, in any case, I've always wanted to like metal more than I do, and I've found out why now, because they didn't quite sound like Absent Embodies Plague God, I suppose. This is brilliant. Take it away if you like.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. This is a sort of like soundscape metal music that really makes... Did you say like post-metal?
That's one of
Yeah, see, post-metal, soundscape metal experimentations is where metal... One of the avenues where it's gone in the last 20 years, which I really find fascinating, because it's like almost they've taken like Brian Eno's like philosophy of music creation and just sort of appropriated it into the metal aesthetic. And it's something within metal that I can really get behind, you know, as opposed to like you were saying earlier, how like certain like punk music that can capture that id, where sometimes when metal tries to do that sort of like highly distorted, bombastic, like you know, earfuck music, it gets like, it's kind of obnoxious.
Yeah,
you know?
Just for clarification, the genre that I'm gonna like demand you turn it off if you play it, and it's partly my age. It's the metalcore.
Sure.
I grew up with that stuff was popular among people in my age group. I might have felt more passionate about hating new metal if I was a bit older. So with metalcore, I just can't. I just fucking can't.
Metalcore started in the 90s, and that metalcore doesn't sound like the 2000s metalcore music is almost like an extension of new metal in a way. Yeah, okay, so it's weird like that.
Sure.
But yeah, so certain
kids our age didn't call it metalcore; they called it screamo.
Yeah,
metalcore was like
screamo.
The internet. You went on the internet; those bands were referred to as metalcore.
Yeah. Or
not many people our age called it metalcore. Some people.
Metalcore maybe in like taxonomical places, but like as far as even like boards on the internet go, people still called it screamo. Really.
Okay, true.
Yeah, that was the nomenclature, was screamo.
There you go.
And the you know, the scientific classification was metalcore.
Yeah.
But it's weird. I don't even want to like try to dissect how that whole thing would have played out.
Like no one at school said metalcore. You know what I mean? Never happened.
Not until the like...
Except for me when I was shitting on it.
Well, not until like the late 2010s. Like
True.
You know, by that point, I think metalcore had really taken off as the designation of that style.
Yeah.
Whereas it was pretty much screamo before that. But screamo was also another thing in the music world. Maybe that's just America as opposed to Australia.
Yeah, I was going to briefly kind of wonder aloud. Was screamo just an Australian slang term?
Maybe in Australia referring to metalcore.
Yeah.
Because in America it was like emo music that was like, you know, with screaming vocals as opposed to like melodic vocals from the 90s again.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, the taxonomy of these genres between the 90s and 2000s gets muddied in a weird way. But anyway, that's a fun tangent.
Yeah.
But as far as like the stylings of aggressive music go, this captures the id in the way that hardcore punk music does. Like I've always really liked Minor Threat, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And you listen to Minor Threat, and the way it tumbles and uses things like distortion and bass, and then like tempo changes, reminds me of something like this. It does it in like a very sort of intuitive way. You know, it's making this sort of hardcore, distorted, bombastic music, but in a way that feels natural.
Yeah.
As opposed to like, I don't know, I love Husker Du, but like early hardcore punk Husker Du just kind of sounds like noise. It's not quite as
Sure, yeah.
what they eventually became, and plenty of hardcore bands are kind of like that. Another hardcore band like that is a band called Middle Class, who like, well, we technically had the first ever hardcore punk EP release, even before Black Flag, like a month or two, in 78 or 79. But then their best like material is the one album they did, which is more just like Gang of Four
Oh, yeah.
from like 1980 or 81. So yeah, no, it's funny how this sort of music reminds me of, like you were saying, that abrasive hardcore music that just can capture. Like I think someone who doesn't even like metal could get behind this. It may be like, you know, they'd have to be a bit high or something. You know, they couldn't just be in their car in the morning or something, and that might put them off.
No, I wouldn't listen to this in my car in the morning.
Yeah, exactly. But in certain circumstances, like a dark full moon night around a campfire, if you played this for someone who didn't even like metal, I reckon in that circumstance they would love it, because it's music first and foremost.
Yeah.
And it oh man, like all the like ridiculous sort of crescendos and then pullbacks, and it's just so creative. Yeah, this album is definitely worth a listen, even if you're not a metal fan. Like, yeah, maybe you won't go back to it, but you'll definitely be pleased you heard it. You know.
Yeah. And I'm very much like the idea of, partly with Mandala, is these kind of come more ingrained in my memory because they've been on Mandala, and so I'll know to put it on in future, definitely, and partly because I knew I would. It's the kind of album where I wouldn't want to forget about it.
I think it's worth re-listens as well. Yeah, I think that's why I would check it out again, is because it seems like the sort of album, like we were saying earlier, things like Low and stuff, you know, it's worth hearing multiple times for all its intricacies and interesting, you know, it's for its creativity.
Yeah, and I may as well share now a bit of, just ahead of time, for the next Mandala program, I will actually, because there's been a lot of discussion about recent releases as well as some older sort of 1980s, perhaps like, you know, British pop music, maybe a bit more pop-optimistic than rockist at times. And the next Mandala episode, just because while we're talking about metal, my last two picks were kind of heavy metal oriented, I will take a more heavy music approach for the next week, vaguely rockist. We'll be talking about heavier releases and like the changing perspectives and across time, mainly in the areas that I'm interested in, from say like 1977 up until last year, 2023, with an album I really liked from that year. And so that's just a bit of a preview for next week, because I do need to give some credence to that sort of rock album world, rather than, you know, just because whilst a lot of that stuff is over discussed and also like frankly a little bit overrated in terms of like, you know, like you just want to listen to these like, and just to listen back and just admire these like well composed rock songs again and again and again, like especially like once they've hit you, and like you kind of have to wait for them to really, you know, for a certain lack of familiarity with them again before you get into them as much. And that pop music can be the same thing, but like,
sure,
I feel like with pop music, like a lot of the pop music we've been talking about, it's equally sort of admirable and sort of mentally stimulating as it is sort of infectious to your body.
It satisfies both worlds. Sure, yeah, definitely.
Whereas like the rock music, I mean, like, unless it's punk, a lot of that pre-punk rock music tends to be of a more, I don't know, intellectual. I mean, obviously the prog is, but yeah, some of the you know, like some of the hard rock of the 70s, when it's not in the prog territory, tends to, I don't know, like how much, like you know, like how many of those riffs are really that, like they get you really riled up, like, you know, hype, psyched up, like you have to be at the time.
Funny enough, Paranoid.
That's out before that good.
Yeah. That's such a good riff. It's so simple, but like
all this stuff's happened since then in punk, electronic music.
Definitely.
That like it's to get psyched up from like certain Zeppelin riffs doesn't seem as obvious as it would have to people at the time.
Yeah.
I love Led Zeppelin. I love Led Zeppelin almost as much as I did when I first got into them as a teenager, and I've become a lot snobbier since then, and I still think Led Zeppelin are really great. But just to be clear, actually Zeppelin aren't one of the acts I'll be discussing next. Not that I'll never discuss a Zeppelin release, not that I make that forbidden or anything. But yeah, just to I thought it might be fascinating just mention that now, just so it's not a complete surprise next week for listeners, just so it's not there's one of these obnoxious, bet you didn't know it was going to go there. It's like,
So which one are you picking?
Oh, these are for next week. Oh, you'll find out.
Okay.
So
you're keeping it a mystery.
Yeah, I'll send you them on Saturday or Sunday with my next guest.
Yeah.
But no, I guess we're gonna move it on to your last pick now.
Yeah. All right, my last one. Where do I begin with this? Jeremy Harmer, Idiosyncratics and Swallow's Wings. What an album name, man. I don't think an album name has ever been so verbose yet so appropriate to its album. Yeah, this is one that I guess like all the guests you've had so far on your show seem to be music bootleggers that I came across whilst bootlegging. And man, am I glad I did. I think I found it in within psychedelic folk, it was probably classified, something like that. And I don't know if it's psychedelic, but it's definitely ahead of its time in its sort of content, but then also sort of weirdly out of time in its arrangement, because it's very lo-fi. What year is it? 1967?
Yes.
Yeah, and it's clearly not done with Abbey Road Studios or anything. You're not getting Come Together or anything. This is very, very lo-fi, yet still somehow at the same time arranged very intricately and interestingly, I feel. And for a sort of folk album, I guess where the psychedelic comes in is it's got arrangements outside of the acoustic guitar. These it'll have violins doing weird sort of strange droning noises and vibraphone and stuff like that. So I just I guess that's how you sort of describe its sonic spaces. But man, when I came across this album, I was just the first thing that, before I listened to it, someone pointed out that the guy's voice sounded like Morrissey. And then you hear the baritone and you're like, oh, wow. This is kind of interesting. And then as I kept listening to the album, I remember when I first listened to it, it was in early morning. And I get to the third song, which I didn't know the track listing, the names of the songs until recently when it was officially uploaded onto YouTube. And the third track's called A Sad Song. Yeah. And I'm just walking down an alleyway, and then this lyric comes in about how this guy walks through his city of despair down an alleyway that never ends. And I'm like, man, what an appropriate lyric to happen. And I just love it when folk music can this sort of lyrical yearning style of lyrical. And I guess that's what I meant by this sort of style of songwriting is very ahead of its time, though to some degree behind, early crooning music, and you hear old-timey love songs and they're very stalkerish in a way. But this feels more like it's something out of the Slacker era, but being done in the 60s with the stylings of Morrissey and strange lo-fi folk music, and it's such a combination of worlds and so out of time. I feel it's both archaic for its day, but also ahead of its day, and yeah, it's just a weirdly personal and intimate album as well in its lyrical capacity, and I feel in its musical sort of experimentations, Even at one point, after a few sort of dreary songs, this traditional sort of weird folk acoustic instrumental arrangement comes in, and then sort of creates this sort of barren desert sort of place, and then brings you into the end of the album. And I just feel it's so, for a guy who had one album, I think, just this album.
No, there's a couple.
Oh, is there?
There's one from 1970. Hold on.
Oh man, I got to hear his other album.
No, there's one from 1974 called English Tea.
Okay.
And then there's, in 2010, with Steve Bingham, Touchable Dreams, 2013, Other Loves. They have no ratings or reviews on this website, so I don't think they're very widely heard.
Yeah.
They're out there, apparently.
I don't think this album is very widely heard either.
Well, I mean, if it wasn't officially uploaded to YouTube at the time when it was uploaded by yourself, then
yeah,
not, right? I mean, that may have motivated someone, which is interesting.
Yeah, I find it so weird that there can be such amazing intimate music like this that is so unknown. It just makes me like yearn for how much more there even is out there. There's so much to go. It's yeah, I love that albums like this exist, to be honest. It's so good. And like even yeah, like I compared it at least someone compared his voice to Morrissey. And I love how there's this sort of verbose style of like English songwriting. I probably pointed out with things like the Go-Betweens and stuff like that. That also Morrissey did, this very literate and like overly wordly style of Fraser Chorus do it too. It's very English to do this style of songwriting, and like it's just like the I think the second last track is called like Self-Contained, and it's about like watching people smoking cigarettes on the downtown train, and just all these like long verbose verses that are just so like fascinatingly constructed, and then the way it weaves into the music, it's better than poetry, honestly. It's a very raw, real style of artistic creation, I feel. So yeah, no, this album is definitely something to check out if someone hasn't heard it. What do you reckon?
No, this is really, really good. Idiosyncratics and Swallow's Wings. I really, really liked it. I think why some would refer to it as psychedelic folk is the guitar tone, just very 60s, I guess.
Yeah.
There's no keyboards, there's no wall of sound. It's not Piper at the Gates' Dawn.
No, it's not like that. Nah.
And I think there's a quality about it which is very... No, it does feel... A lot of people try to be more somber, sort of... psych pop and sort of, songwritery in like the 90s and 2000s during the psych and neo-psych world. There was people who tried to be these sort of Syd Barrett figures, but here we have Mr. Harmer, who's... I think that's why I agree it was ahead of its time, because this did feel like a trend that was taken off later on, where people probably didn't even know who Jeremy Harmer was.
No, not at all. Yeah, probably not at all.
No, yeah, really, really liked the album. Not the kind of thing I would have found out about, or maybe even listened to, had it not been for, I guess, well, initially you're uploading it, but then of course mentioning it for the Mandala program here, and it was a thoroughly enjoyable album. We'll mention, this is just my fault, essentially, last track, Melanie, made me feel slightly melancholic, but give me a few months and I'll probably
I suppose I didn't really think about that, to be honest.
Nor should anyone,
yeah.
to be totally fair. Now, I also would like to read out here, there's one review of this album on Rate Your Music, and I did notice this as I was exploring the album. This user... I'm not pronouncing this username probably correctly. Pleiades, Pleiades, and what she's done here is she apparently hosts this particular radio show, and she's published a transcript of the interview she's held with Mr. Jeremy Harmer on a show broadcast on the 30th of October 2020.
Oh, cool.
At the top of this transcript, she's included a quote from Harmer. I don't know if this is from the interview or not, or if it's from some other source. Harmer says, this is the first of three things I'd like to read out, because these are all very interesting and it's good context, and people don't know Jeremy Harmer, so it's not like we're just reading information about like Bob Dylan or Leonard Cohen.
Nick Drake. I love the album and I don't even know this information. Please.
Excellent. Jeremy Harmer quote: "Words are so beautiful but a tricky thing. Words... And when you say one thing, you're sort of sometimes excluding other things you could say. And when you say some things, they're so obvious, but they don't really carry any weight or anything. So what you try and do, you talk about me having pictures in my words. What you try and do is express through words the kind of emotions you're feeling, and if you like, the metaphorical territory they occupy."
Yeah.
And I'd like to read out the answer to his question, the answer to the interviewer's question. What inspires you? What connection do you have to your art? This is a very big question. This is
Yeah.
big open ears. I think the beauty of songwriting or any music making is that it's all about trying to channel your thoughts and your feelings through with a different kind of language. If you think of instrumental music, for example, the power of music to express emotions like sadness and anger and excitement and nervousness and danger is extraordinary. How you can do that without any words at all, and that's what connects me, because for me I see divinity, if you like. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I see divinity in those extraordinary moments of connection with some universal feelings of love and loss and joy which music can bring. And I think
That's what I've been trying to say for like the last 4 episodes.
and I think whether you're a teenager in your bedroom or a somewhat older person, in my case, bent over a guitar trying to make lovely music, you can find those places in yourself with the music you are creating. I don't want to exaggerate this. I'm not suggesting that, a 3-minute song reaches the heights of, I don't know, Beethoven or Gustav Mahler or something. Of course it doesn't. But that is the thing that pushes you to be able to find that place, that sweet spot, that lovely place where your emotions fuse with this feeling of a kind, of a way of expressing them, which is quite unique. And now finally...
Yeah. It's intimate music, yeah, definitely.
And finally, because this is not really told anywhere else, the question and the answer subsequent to it. What's the story behind your debut album, Idiosyncratics and Swallows Wings? Where did you record it? What kind of equipment did you use? I read that it was recorded in a BBC studio in Norwich and pressed in a run of 99 copies featuring David Costa from The Trees on guitar.
Wow.
The album also features a mini chamber ensemble of guitar, flute, viola, bass and drums. Orchestral arrangements by John Trevitt.
Okay.
Was there a certain concept behind the album? Would you share your insight on the album's tracks? What about album artwork? That LP is quaint concept. A vinyl LP was made while I was at university. I was to university and I was playing chords and songs by Peter, Paul and Mary and people like that. But when I go to university, I find myself, for the first time in my life, sitting very close to some of the greatest new folk guitarists of the day. I single out in particular Bert Jansch, who I was sitting literally about 10 feet away from, just watching him like a hawk, and just being blown away by what he was able to do, and what at the time seemed like such a new way of treating steel string acoustic guitar. That inspired me to start writing songs. What were they about? Well, they were about a very young and immature man's preoccupations and weird kind of visions of the time we lived in. I mean, one of the tracks on the album is called People Smile with Ghosts in the Land of Make-Believe.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what it was. It was some kind of poetic vision that seemed to me to make sense, but when I listen to it now, I'm filled with what one British writer memorably called tender contempt. Because some of the lyrics on the album I couldn't possibly write now, and they seem to be very young and very naive, and the guitar playing is too slow and so on and so forth. But I viewed with great tenderness, of course, because it's also me, and it was the first time I really went for it. I really tried to do something special and was driven to go for it.
Yeah.
And there were friends of mine. I was at university. I was at the University of East Anglia in Norwich, and there are friends around, and musicians I knew, including John, who I knew. He was in the School of Fine Arts studying music, and he did some arrangements for me. Yes, as you say, a chamber orchestra, we had bassoons and cellos and violins. We had a chorus of women who accompanied me, and overwhelmingly we had David Costa, who is a stupendously good guitarist who I'd become friends with. And it's one of the proudest things in my life that he says that he went on to form Trees and that group and so on and so forth. That was partly as a result of being involved in Idiosyncratics and Swallows Wings. Of course, the album sounds a bit weird because, as you quite rightly say, it was filmed. It was recorded in a TV studio. It wasn't, in fact, the BBC. It was Anglia Television, ITV, in Norwich, late at night, and the guy who did it, I can't even remember whether he should have done it because it wasn't like official TV business. And the other problem about it is that he just had those... what you get in the big TV studios, those hanging microphones from the ceiling, but they're not really set up for audio recording in the same way. And he didn't have any subtle ways of adjusting the sound. I think every single song was recorded in one take, and as I say, there were no, if you go to a recording studio now, you'll also have...
It's the original Slacker album.
You'll have also so different mics and inputs for the different instruments and so on and so forth, which you can then play. But this didn't happen with that album. But then, yes, I paid for the printing of 99 copies at the time, which is terribly exciting. And I kind of forced all my friends and various other people at the university to buy until I'd sold all of them, and sort of I made my money back. But that's the story of that. Artwork, had another friend called Hilary John. Yeah, if I recall. And he helped me with the design of that album and the lettering and so on and so forth. But yeah, it was a university thing you do, and I'm proud to have done it. But as I say, I look back at it with still a sort of mixture, a sort of love and horror. I think that's the best way of saying it. Yeah. He's a music teacher now, by the way, I'm pretty sure. Jeremy Harmer, he's taught in the UK, but where he's from, but also he's taught in Mexico, I believe.
Okay.
Let me just... Yeah, has taught English in Mexico and the UK, and he's
that's a
trained
great
teachers around
interview.
the world. I'm pretty sure it's this guy. Let me just Jeremy Harmer music. Perhaps there's a few Jeremy Harmers out there.
Sure. I love that, he made it as a uni thing and he views it in that way. And then I listen to it and I'm just like, wow, this is a little, like, artifact, a sort of crypto art piece that is sort of just been sitting there waiting for people to really appreciate.
It is the same. Another question's about him being a teacher of English language.
Yeah, cool.
So maybe that's partly why he looks at it. Maybe he's read hours and days of poetry.
That's just like Ray Davies with Waterloo Sunset, though. But, but everyone says Waterloo Sunset is this you wouldn't change it, you know?
Yeah.
So that's how, like, honestly, that's how an artist should look at their old work, especially from their uni days as well. Even if it does transcend, and they can't realize it, only the audience can.
Yeah.
But it makes sense that, like, they're the real artists. They can be like, oh, nah, you know, it wasn't quite what... Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. It's not for them, you know. It's for the audience.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that interview was amazing. That guy seems really smart and has a creative vision. And like I was saying earlier, it's great when people open up to their creative process, you know, properly. It's none of this. It's the opposite of promotion within the realm of, you know, commerciality.
Yeah.
You know, you look at a blockbuster film, for example, and all the infamously, like in the Plinkett sense, you know, he's like, all the actors in Star Wars are really good because look at them in their promotional material. Natalie Portman's really selling Padme's character's conflict. And it's like, yeah, wow. And so, like, promotion is always just like that false acting, you know? Whereas, something like this is just like... it's raw and real, you know. It doesn't need to be promoted in that sort of market machine sense, you know. Which is, like he said, he had to literally encourage all his friends to buy it. But if he didn't do that back then, people 40 years, 50 years later wouldn't be, like us, wouldn't be talking about it now. So... You know, this sort of like folk promotion is almost better. You know, it's more raw and real in a way. It's it doesn't have the fraudulence of at least what I feel is the fraudulence of market promotion. You know, it's something. It's culture that's made by the culture. You know, it's not being ordained upon the culture.
Absolutely.
You know? Yeah, so I didn't even think of this album in those terms, but yeah, it's strong. Yeah, clearly, wow.
Really, really good stuff. And just in the interest of a finite night, anything else to share about Harmer before we move on to the final pick of the day?
No, let's go to the last one.
These are the glory days. L. Michel's Affair. And
that's a little melody, chorus melody that will literally stick in your head. That'll constantly pop into your head if you listen to this album enough.
Black Thought was famous for being essentially, I think, the creative mastermind behind fairly well-known American hip-hop group, The Roots, which have been putting out albums since the early 90s, I believe. They've been quite prolific. I don't know if they've been together the whole time, but they have put out works to the current decade.
They have heaps of albums,
Yeah, I'm not familiar with a lot of them. I remember liking the Phrenology album from 2001 or something. That's
nice. Good. I don't think I've heard that, but yeah.
I remember thinking this is something going on here. That's the era of, I don't know if it's just my age, but I like that sort of like very, I don't know, spacey sort of electronic dance hip hop, like Cold Vein, Cannibalox, King Ghidorah, that era of doom.
Yeah,
like that's like one of my favorite eras of hip hop. Yeah, that moment there, like that's Company Flow in like '97, like that's the coolest shit in the world. ELP in general and his solo album.
Sure.
He produced Cold Vein.
Yeah.
Too good. You know, that's the stuff I really love. And some contemporary stuff I love similarly. Like I love the recent sort of World of Injury Reserve, you know, and some of these other like experimental acts. Like even like, you know, where West was going on, you know, like Life of Pablo, which is I think one of the greatest albums of all time.
That's a great album, yeah.
It's insanely great, I think. And it's one of those albums where you really have to suspend your disbelief of, is this following the rules of a good album? You just have to let it do everything that it does and accept that everything unique about it and every choice made is there, and like it's like, oh, but was this the most tasteful or fucking subtle way? It's not about that. It's about, as we said before, it's about pathology.
Yeah.
It's about pathology. And if
No,
there's anyone
definitely.
you want to get the pathology of, the pathology of like the most famous man in the world, and like just the craziness and the unpredictability, and to put it on this kind of somber release where at the end, it does brief Life of Pablo spiel. At the end, he's going, "Oh my God, like now I have a daughter and I didn't." Oh, I think it's Yay, sorry, where like he's like kind of like terrified at the end of Yay that I wish I had a daughter early and I wish I could have like treated women. He's scared of bad karma. He's terrified.
That's actually
one of the most real things I've ever heard.
That's very raw. Yeah. I remember when I first heard that, I was like, oh my God, that's very real. Yeah. Certainly. People are very afraid to put shit like that out there, but it's definitely true.
I guess he always put himself in a place where he was a bit slightly untouchable, just being at least materially untouchable at that time. But anyway, we're not talking about that particular release. We're talking about Glorious Game, El Michel's Affair, and Blackfort. El Michel's Affair, they've been putting out work since 2005, but ever since 2021, they've been doing work with other artists such as Liam Bailey in the album Ekondayo Inversions from 2021, and then in 2023 they've worked with Blackfort to put out Glorious Game. And I remember, how was it that I became aware that this was coming out? I think, oh yeah, of course.
Oh, because you did the collab album the year before, right?
Yeah, no, I was a big fan of Danger Mouse and Blackfort's Cheat Codes. And so I guess at one
That's
point...
a great album too.
That's a really great
But this
release.
one's even better, to be honest.
Yeah, and I was... on Blackfort's page, I became aware that, I got into Cheat Codes, the year it came out, and last year I was listening to it a bit, and I'm like, oh, look, he's got something coming out in 2023, so literally on the day it was uploaded, hey, let's listen to Glorious Game, this just came out, and it's a very tasteful 31-minute album. Isn't it nice how the hip-hop artists, they know what to do with the album format, and the rock artists just put every fucking track on there.
Yeah.
I already ran on my spiel about how, legally they're songs, but are they songs, aesthetically? Fuck it.
Not really.
Whereas, hip-hop is the kind of more, I guess, electronic production era attitude of they're tracks. They're tracks.
Yeah.
And this is one of the better hip-hop albums I've heard from the 2010s. Not that Cheat Codes already was, but
2020s.
2020s, excuse me. I was thinking 2020s, but obviously 2010s came out on my mouth. Lush production. I almost just wanted to just throw this album up because I was like, let's just mention this thing that there's still major classics coming out. These are the glory days.
This is a major classic, definitely, yeah.
Brilliant verses, gorgeous production, beautifully hi-fi. We've got more to say within the hip-hop genre.
Especially within the old, lyrical realm, I was saying a few episodes ago how, the backpacker jazz lyrical hip-hop world is almost like Chuck Berry or who did I say? What's
Deep Purple?
Yeah, it's like Bo Diddley compared to...
Deep Purple.
The new stuff is like Deep Purple.
Yeah.
But this is great proof that old world still has so much more that you can do with it,
Yeah, especially with the modern sonics, I think.
With the modern soundscape sonics, it's as good as it's ever been. This is one of those, oh man, the production is perfect. And then mixing in, the pathology, like you were saying, of Kanye West, but, Black Thought, I think he's got a lot to say. His stream of consciousness ramblings are very pathological and evocative, and similar to someone like Mark Kozlak, you can understand this guy and his situation so well. There's this one track on here that there's a trilogy of 3 amazing songs. I feel one's called Protocol, and then The Weather, and then That Girl, and all those The Weather has one of the best metaphor, the track itself is so inventive with its it's half tempo, and then it speeds up, slows down, speeds up again in such a intuitive and natural way. But the lyrical content just evokes this imagery of like I assume he's from New York because it's like these like New York like sort of block experience in like the way people describe what's that movie that Spike Lee movie Do the Right Thing. Yeah, it's like that. Like a song can evoke that sort of time and place in a way because it's like a nostalgia song about growing up when people were like first utilizing hip hop, and he's describing what his grandmother's cooking and like what people are doing, like just playing like different types of stickball and sort of games on the streets and shit like that. He's talking about how like there's a TV on whether no one's watching it or not, and it's just so like deep in its imagery that I can literally like I'm there, like I'm visually in this place. I'm in Do the Right Thing or something. It's amazing that a song can do that. It's kind of nuts, really, in my mind.
Yeah. It says Black Thought was born in Philadelphia, by the way.
Oh, Philly. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, no, sorry, he does mention Philly a few times. But yeah, same thing. Philly was very similar, I think, with its sort of like urban community or whatever, Everyone's hanging out on the steps and they're cooking barbecues and, TVs are on. People are cutting up Let's Dance or Funky Drummer. That's another thing that I was thinking about this album earlier. Do you remember there was an Andre 3000 album recently?
Yeah, of course.
It was like a spiritual jazz, new agey sort of album.
I remember that, yeah.
But the way I found out about it was my brother sent me a meme that I guess was going around somewhere of like, they were like, oh, the new Andre 3000 album's gonna be like full of hard-hitting funky beats and like backpacking jazz quotes and, jazz like licks and quotables for years. But I'm just like, man, I listened to this album, and that's like what that meme was describing. It's like the proper like retro classic that we needed right now.
Yeah, I didn't quite like New Blue Sun from what I heard of it. There's the Andre 3000 album.
Yeah, it's okay. It's just a bit like it's not Lil B.
Okay.
It's good for what it is, but yeah, like it's not Glorious Game either.
No, yeah. But yeah, this is one of the better albums of the 2020s thus far. And actually, what rate your music lists Glorious Game as the, so far, 194th best album of 2023. I think it's probably one of the 10 best of 2023.
Sure.
That I've heard. Actually, I'm going to go look at this will be a bit of fun. Let's look at what the 10 best of 2023 is considered and see. Okay, number one. Okay, it's definitely better than Scaring the Hose by JPEG Mafia and Danny Brown. Overrated as fuck. Danny Brown ain't that great in my opinion. And neither is JPEG Mafia, though I like the idea of where some of that's coming from. Like, musically, it's like, I think it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Like, but I just prefer other people.
Sure, yeah.
Like the recent Black Thought stuff, Injury Reserve, even the Billy Wood stuff recently. Like, there's an album from 2019 called Hiding Places. Fucking fantastic. Javelin, Sufjan Stevens. I heard a bit of that. Seems good. Some of Sufjan's recent stuff.
Stevens.
Some of his recent work is like the best stuff he's done.
He's still going.
Yep.
Wow, there you go.
He does weird stuff lately.
Yeah, there you go.
Like this is weird stuff. Like
I guess he's popular enough.
Like he did like all these like meditations, lamentations series of like kind of like I don't know what are they describing them as? Like kind of like ambient progressive music.
Okay.
And then he had The Beginner's Mind in 2021, which is very weird, but I kind of liked it. Reflections didn't get good reviews, but I remember thinking it was not so bad.
Okay.
But yeah,
didn't realize he was being so prolific.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah, I gotta get into that, I guess.
Some people really like it. And of course, I mean, yeah, Billy Woods and Kenny Siegel still getting praise. Their 2023 album Maps is listed at number 3 here. That's a good album, but I prefer Hiding Places. I haven't heard this, which is Joe Hisaishi and Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, a symphonic celebration. Oh, no, I have heard this music, but just not on this album. A symphonic celebration music from the Studio Ghibli films of Hayao Miyazaki. It's good music, but I haven't heard this.
Sure, yeah. I'm sure just because people love Miyazaki, they've rated that.
Yeah, fair enough, yeah. And then we have, I heard a bit of this. It seems fairly good. It's kind of jazz rap revival. Beloved Paradise Jazz by McKinley Dixon.
Okay.
This is a group which I've liked some of the other stuff they did, namely the 2020 album Shrines and the 2021 album Harem. But Armand Hammer's 2023 release We Buy Diabetic Test Strips, I didn't think it was very compelling. Seems a bit lazy by comparison, or maybe arrogant, or maybe they just don't doing something more minimal, but it just didn't gel with me as much. And then I haven't heard La High by Sampha. That feels good. Do it again. I have a soft spot for that Jessie Ware album, though a superior album is, and where is it listed here? Fat 35 is Ana Frango Electrico's Me Chama de Gato Cor é Sal Sua. Forgive my pronunciation of Portuguese, but Electric Fish is one of the best pop songs of the 2020s thus far. I'm better than any track on That Feels Good. But it's a really good album, to be fair. Ooh Rap Aya by George Clanton. I've heard of George Clanton, but I don't know if I heard this album yet. George Clanton. Yeah, I remember he had a big album in 2018 called Slide, which I didn't think was the greatest thing in the world, but I don't think I've heard Ooh Rap Aya. I guess Slide's described as sort of chill wave synth pop. I was just like, okay, nah, not too modern, not too. It reminds me too much of certain people close to my age who I don't hang out with.
Do you mean like modern kitsch? Because chill wave seems like modern kitsch.
That's a pretty decent way of putting it. And the 10th album listed here is Hell Mode by Jeff Rosenstock. I haven't heard that, but I've heard some of Jeff Rosenstock's other albums. And Worry in 2016, and No Dream was 2020. That's not really my thing. Hell Mode's been described as power pop indie rock, so as you can imagine, it's not what I spent a lot of time with.
Fuck yeah, Weezer!
No Dreams, pop punk. Worry is also listed as pop punk, so it's just not really what I do. Punk, no. So I haven't heard the newer Jeff Rosenstock for that reason, because the older ones, by older I mean like last decade.
Well, it's technically not punk unless it's pop. It's an oxymoron.
But as in popular music.
Yeah, I don't even know. Pop punk is like the weirdest description.
That's another genre I can't listen to pop. Like all the big pop bands of the 90s. That's like, and some people like it now and they grew up with it, and I hate that music and I don't disown those people, but
well, you don't like Lagwagon.
I don't even heard of Lagwagon. Like I don't even fucking.
No, I love how that's always my go-to pop punk band. Just because there's some band called Lagwagon that no one remembers, but they were somehow popular at the time at the height of pop punk.
Ah, blimey!
How weird is that?
Yeah.
Well, what's the other one? Pennywise.
I know.
Because when people think of pop punk, they think of Blink-182 and Good Charlotte or Green Day.
And,
I love just Lagwagon and Pennywise. It's there are all these other obscure pop punk bands. It's such a weird scene.
The Offspring one of those as well, right?
Because it's all Offspring. Yeah, it's all from California.
When I was a kid, I used to like that song, Pretty Fly, but I can't listen to it now.
It's a bit too much, yeah.
At the time, it was just funny. When you're
yeah, when you're a kid,
you first start
it's Weird Al
attractive. It's just funny.
It's Weird Al Yankovic. You can't listen to Weird Al Yankovic as an adult and be I guess, fascinated. It's just
when you're 12 and there's this sexy sounding girl going, "Give it to me, baby."
Yeah.
That's I like this song.
It was a schoolyard song as well.
Oh.
Everyone in the schoolyard knew that. Even if they didn't know the song, they knew that thing. It was an ongoing joke.
Dare I say that's even a stroke of mild genius, putting that in there.
Oh, yeah. In the novelty song sense. Definitely, yeah.
And just this really basic 70s rock riff behind it.
Yeah, like a surf rock riff.
Yeah.
It's like Dick Dale or whatever. Ha, ha, ha.
Oh, we heard that a lot in the 2000s too.
Oh, of course.
Yikes.
But yeah, no, that's
The 2000s are over. These are the glory days. The 2020s. COVID's winding down, and we're going to try and make the best of this decade. Bad start, admittedly. Bad start.
These are the glory days. Music's only getting better, like you were saying before. With there seems to have been a recent explosion post 2020 COVID with interesting music. I don't know if that's just a subjective thing. It seems to be kind of literal.
You know what it is? I think it's partly because people are taking regular music really seriously and looking at all the other stuff that's come out over the years, and people are more educated on the history of music than ever, and where people feel as though let's face it, everyone's at least heard whether they take them seriously or not, everyone's heard the Mark Fisher or Mark Fisher fans going, "Oh, nothing's original," and so there are people going, "Alright, fucking I'll challenge accepted."
Yeah, fuck you, I'll do it.
No, that Lingua Ignota album, even though you could say, "Oh, it just sounds like one of those fucking Nico albums," Who's complaining? Who's complaining that it sounds like Desert Shore, motherfuckers?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Albums haven't sounded like Desert Shore since Desert Shore.
Desert Shore, yeah, that's true.
Not very many. It's like, oh, this lo-fi album which no one's heard from 1990. Shut up. Like, yeah, I know that exists. So
well,
I don't know that exists.
There was this Mortal Coil. I suppose this Mortal Coil were like Desert Shore then. Yeah. And I think there was a band called Desert Shore in the 90s.
Yeah. Marble Index then. Fuck it, whatever.
Yeah, Marble Index.
I know. Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's definitely true. There wasn't albums like that through like definitely through the 2000s and 2010s. It's like finally there was an explosion of original ideas.
Yeah, but 2010s was hit or miss, man. Like,
well, that's what I was saying.
Yeah, I mean, I look at the top 10 of the 2010s here. I'm just like, I don't know. I won't read it out here, but like just because maybe that might be a fun idea for another show one day. If just or like a bonus thing, I don't know.
Oh, just quickly read them. Don't describe them. Just read what they are.
You know what? We'll do that.
Because I'm curious.
Yeah, we'll get you to react to them in real time. Do you want to hear them from 10 to 1 or from 1 to 10?
10 to 1.
Okay. 10, To Be Kind, Swans.
Sure, yeah.
9, Carrion Lowell, Sufjan Stevens.
Sure. I haven't heard it, but I'm sure it's pretty good.
I won't comment on these, just reading said I wouldn't. Black Star, David Bowie.
Yeah, cool.
Blonde, Frank Ocean.
Yeah, alright. Why not?
Atrocity Exhibition, Danny Brown.
Yeah, I haven't heard that one, to be honest, but why is it naming itself... Is it naming itself after the Joy Division song or the book?
I'm just guessing the Joy Division song.
I want to hear this album to understand
I doubt some of these fucking artists are that fucking... They might pretend they are, but they're not that. Like, he probably only heard Joy Division within the last...
Joy Division got the name from the book, obviously.
Yeah, but like, I don't know, whenever I see some of these artists make reference to like... Depending on who they are, they'll make a reference to like Gundam or something. I'm just like, you just got into that last year.
Calling in my skin.
And not to mention, I don't even think Grimes read Dune before 2010. When fucking Gady Prime came out. Fucking, I'm going to have nerd cred because Big Bang Theory is a popular show. And then you enabled Elon Musk. Thanks, woman. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Number 5.
Yeah, but everyone hates Elon Musk now, so at least that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry,
actually, Grimes, I hope you made a dent in his finances, but I know just based on what I'm watching the news that you didn't. So whatever. Yeah. Number 5 is Igor, Tyler the Creator.
Sure.
Money Store by Death Grips.
Oh yeah, that's a beloved album.
My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, Kanye West.
That's a pretty beloved album.
Good Kid, MAAD City.
The
Kendrick
Mad
Lamar.
Cities.
And to Pimp That Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar.
Oh, he has the top 2.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
I guess that's why
I'm
people
not going to comment on these, as I said.
I guess that's why people like him more than Drake at the moment.
Yeah, I don't know what that's all about. I know whose music I like more, and I know I'm not the greatest fan of either.
It's probably just
one I'm not a fan of at all. Actually, no.
I'm going to go out on a limb and speculate that it's all just a publicity stunt, like hip-hop beefs always have been.
I don't... always... Some of them got pretty serious. I don't know, historically.
Yeah, but I suppose people like Drake and Kendrick probably do have connections to mafias like Biggie and Tupac do.
Do they?
Perhaps. Like, story goes...
Record industry is a mafia.
All these celebrities do. They all hire goons to be their security. You know what I mean? They hire, like, thugs, essentially. Like, literal, you know... You don't hire a fucking military man to be your bodyguard. It's... So who knows whether this stuff is legitimate or, like, just publicity. I personally lean into the McLuhan-esque, like, publicity thing.
Yeah.
Like, maybe that's a bit cynical that these, like, you know, big labels and stuff in conjunction with the artists and mafias or whatever, like, you know, all collaborate to do this. Maybe that's conspiratorial, I don't know, but it just seems like it seems like it's a crime. Like, would it be, if it's so prevalent in the media, why aren't the cops, like, shutting this shit down? Isn't that what law enforcement's for? Like, it's publicized.
Well,
people know about it. It's not like, you know, how mafia and mob activity is normally clandestine.
Yeah.
This is, like, by nature the opposite of clandestine. So that's the thing I don't get about that. It's a shame that Kendrick, like, is that highly acclaimed when the glory days are right now.
Yeah.
And Black Thought should be appreciated along with Al Mackel's affair. But, you know, especially Drake as well. What the fuck?
Yeah, to be fair, like, I'm looking at the Drake albums are not very well rated on this website.
No, because it's a website of, like, music kind of, like,
Yeah.
elitist
Snobby
people.
nerds, yeah.
A bit snobby. So, like, of course they don't like Drake. Drake's, like, a populist, like, artist that is would only exist because of the, you know, consumerist machine that, you know,
Yeah, and look,
dictates what the folks should like.
Yeah, I didn't want to go on too much of a spiel on what I think of these albums and such, although I just will say the two best Kendrick albums are the last two.
Sure.
That's Guy's Got Talent.
Yeah,
The last two
that's probably how you know, like...
quite good.
That's probably how you know...
I don't think they're as good as, like, we talked about both Glorious Game and the Cheat Codes album. I don't think I don't think many contemporary albums touch those, to be fair.
No, those are great
Those
albums.
are fucking fantastic.
Yeah, like I said, I like Glorious Game more, but Cheat Codes is, like, still...
When I heard, Cheat Codes, I was like, yeah.
Man, some of these,
still
like...
stuff to be done in the
like,
genre.
there's... Yeah, easily.
And Danger Mouse is a good track record. I mean,
Danger Mouse.
Back doing that Grey album thing holds up really well.
Sure.
Really,
That's
nice.
hilarious.
And funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Very
It's
creative.
very creative, yeah.
No one would have thought to do that.
No, not...
Who would have thought to do that?
Not before 2010.
Very unintuitive. And then obviously one of the really fascinating...
He originated, like, YouTube music mashes, you know?
Point, yeah. And then, of course, he's partly responsible for one of the more memorable items in the Doom story, I think, in 2005.
That's a fun album,
really,
yeah.
Really good, yeah.
With all the Adult Swim, like, samples. And
What a
shit,
really
yeah.
unique piece of culture
That's why I kind of like that. That's where commercialism is actually incorporated into the folk tradition well, you know, is that album. But at Adult Swim, that was kind of their mission statement, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, at one time Adult Swim were really cool.
Sure, yeah.
Before, like, the mid-2010s, they were really... Basically, after Super Jail was cancelled, it was done.
I probably have to Pickle Rick is like... oh, Rick and Morty is a bit...
That was a few years off. Oh, Rick and Morty aired, like, 2013, and Super Jail's last season was 2014.
Sure. So, yeah, they kind of coincide, right?
Pretty much, yeah, I guess. Anyway, this computer's nearly dead, and just, I think maybe...
Yeah, no, if anyone's still listening, listen to the Glorious Game, please.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you, everyone. Join us next week, if you're so inclined. If we're so inclined, or whoever we might acquire for Mandala next week. Thanks again, everyone.
Yeah, ciao.